Hey guys, welcome back to my new channel. Today we will see what if Harry Potter story. If you enjoyed the video, please leave like, share and share with your friends. Now let's start the video.
Chapter 1. The weight of gold. The goblin at the front desk didn't look up when Harry approached. That was fine. Harry was used to being overlooked. 10 years with the Dursleys had taught him invisibility was a survival skill, and he'd gotten good at it, moving through crowds without drawing attention, keeping his head down, making himself small enough that people's eyes slid right past him. But today felt different. Gringotts rose around him like a cathedral built by creatures who understood wealth the way priests understood prayer. White marble columns climbed toward a ceiling lost in shadow. Golden light spilled from chandeliers that hung like frozen constellations. And everywhere, behind counters, walking the aisles, emerging from doors that appeared and vanished in the walls, goblins moved with purposeful efficiency. Hagrid had been talking the whole walk from the leaky cauldron, his booming voice filling the narrow streets of Diagon Alley with explanations about galleons and sickles and nuts. Harry had listened carefully, filing away each piece of information, but he'd also been watching. Noticing the way witches and wizards moved aside for Hagrid without being asked. The way shop owners' eyes lingered on Harry's forehead before snapping away. The way everyone seemed to know something he didn't. He was getting tired of being the only one without answers. Right then, Hagrid said, patting his enormous coat. "Got your key here somewhere. Dumbledore gave it to me fair safe keepin'. Ah, here we are." He produced a tiny golden key that looked like it belonged to a music box, not a vault. Harry took it, turning it over in his palm. His parents' key. The first physical proof he had that they'd existed outside of dreams and the occasional flash of green light. "Just give that to one of the goblins," Hagrid continued. "They'll take ye down to your vault. I've got some business to attend to myself, Hogwarts stuff, very important, very secret." He tapped the side of his nose conspiratorially. "Meet ye back here in an hour." Harry nodded, already moving toward the nearest available teller. Hagrid meant well, but Harry had learned to recognize when adults wanted him out of the way. Whatever Dumbledore had sent him to collect, Hagrid didn't want witnesses. That was interesting. Harry filed it away with everything else. The goblin he approached was ancient, skin like crumpled parchment, ears that drooped past his jaw, spectacles so thick they made his eyes look like dark marbles. He was writing something in a ledger, the scratch of his quill the only sound in the immediate vicinity. Harry waited. The quill continued scratching. Harry kept waiting. He'd once stood outside Uncle Vernon's office for 3 hours because Vernon had told him to wait and then forgotten about him. This was nothing. After 30 seconds, an eternity in goblin customer service, the ancient creature looked up. His marble eyes fixed on Harry's face, traveled to his forehead, and widened fractionally. "Mr. Potter," he said. "Not a question." "Yes, sir." Harry placed the key on the counter between them. "I'd like to access my vault, please." The goblin's nostrils flared. He picked up the key, examined it, and then set it back down with a soft click that somehow conveyed disapproval. "This key grants access to Trust Vault 687, he said. "A withdrawal account established for your educational expenses." "Is that your intention? To make a withdrawal?" There was something in the way he said it. A test hidden in plain language. Harry had spent years learning to hear what adults meant instead of what they said, and this goblin was definitely meaning something. "I was told I have a vault," Harry said carefully. "I wasn't told it was a trust vault." "What's the difference?" The goblin's thin lips twitched. It might have been irritation. It might have been approval. A trust vault is a subsidiary account established by a primary vault holder. Withdrawals are limited to educational and essential living expenses until the beneficiary reaches majority or claims their full inheritance. "Full inheritance," Harry repeated. "So there's more than one vault." "The Potter family has banked with Gringotts for 7 centuries, Mr. Potter." The question is not whether there are additional vaults. The goblin leaned forward slightly. The question is whether you intend to remain ignorant of what belongs to you. Harry felt something shift in his chest. It was the same feeling he got when Dudley's gang chased him, that moment when running wasn't enough and he had to think, had to find an angle, had to be smarter than everyone who underestimated him. "No," he said. "I don't intend to remain ignorant of anything." The goblin nodded once, sharply, and raised one gnarled hand. Somewhere in the depths of the bank, a bell chimed. "Then you will require verification," he said. "Blood verification. It is the only way to establish your full identity and unlock any additional claims that may exist. Blood verification. 3 drops on a ritual parchment. It will confirm your lineage and any inheritances tied to your bloodline." The goblin's marble eyes glittered. Most wizards never bother. They assume their parents told them everything. They assume the ministry's records are complete. They are, frequently, incorrect. Harry thought about the Dursleys, who told him his parents died in a car crash. About Hagrid, who'd mentioned a trust vault without explaining what trust meant. About Dumbledore, who'd apparently had his key all along and never thought to mention it. "Everyone's been making assumptions about me my whole life," Harry said quietly. "Let's find out how wrong they were." The verification chamber was deep underground, past vaults that looked like they hadn't been opened in centuries, through corridors carved from living rock that hummed with magic Harry could feel in his teeth. The goblin who escorted him wasn't the ancient teller but a younger one, relatively speaking, with sharp features and sharper armor visible beneath his Gringotts uniform. Grip Hook, the goblin had introduced himself. "Senior Accounts Manager. Your case has been flagged." "Flagged how?" Griphook didn't answer. He just led Harry deeper. The chamber itself was circular, maybe 20 feet across, with walls covered in symbols that seemed to move when Harry wasn't looking directly at them. In the center stood a stone pedestal holding a piece of parchment that glowed faintly gold. Behind the pedestal waited 3 goblins. No, Harry corrected himself as he stepped into the chamber, 3 goblins and something else. The 4th figure was larger than the others, dressed in robes rather than the Gringotts uniform, and he radiated an authority that made the others look like clerks. "Mr. Potter," the robed goblin said. His voice was like gravel in a tumbler, rough, heavy, and somehow musical. "I am Ragnarok, Director of Gringotts. I have administered blood verifications for 643 years. In that time, I have seen precisely 12 results that warranted my personal attention." He paused, letting the weight of that settle. "I believe yours will be the 13th. Harry looked at the parchment, at the waiting goblins, at Ragnarok's ancient, knowing eyes. This was another test. Maybe the biggest one yet. He could walk away, take the trust vault, buy his school supplies, and remain exactly as ignorant as everyone seemed to expect him to be. Or he could find out who he really was. "What do I need to do?" Ragnarok's lips curled into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Extend your hand over the parchment. The ritual will do the rest." Harry approached the pedestal. The parchment's glow intensified as he drew near, shifting from gold to something warmer, almost welcoming. He held out his right hand. One of the attending goblins produced a silver knife so thin it was almost invisible. Before Harry could tense, the blade had kissed his palm, just a whisper of pressure, and 3 drops of blood fell onto the parchment. The reaction was immediate. Light erupted from the parchment, not the warm glow from before but something fiercer, brighter, ancient. It spiraled upward like a living thing, carrying Harry's blood with it, dissolving the red drops into streams of golden fire that wrote themselves across the air. Harry couldn't look away. The light formed words, names, that burned themselves into existence and then faded, replaced by more, faster and faster until the entire chamber was filled with overlapping genealogies stretching back centuries. Houses and bloodlines and connections that branched and merged and twisted through history like rivers finding their way to the sea. And then, finally, the light concentrated. solidified. Became 5 distinct symbols that hung in the air before Harry like judgment rendered visible. A stag surrounded by flames. A crow perched on a skull. 3 shapes arranged in a triangle, a line, a circle, a triangle within. A serpent eating its own tail. And one more, a phoenix rising from ashes, wings spread wide. The goblins had gone silent. Even Ragnarok, who had supposedly seen everything in 6 centuries, was staring at those 5 symbols with an expression Harry couldn't read. Then, slowly, the director of Gringotts lowered himself to one knee. The other goblins followed. Heir of Potter, Ragnarok said, his gravel voice somehow softer now. Heir of Black. Heir of Peveril. Heir of Slytherin by right of conquest. He looked up, and his ancient eyes held something that might have been wonder. An heir of House Emrys through a bloodline we believed extinct for 400 years. Harry stared at the symbols, at the kneeling goblins, at the parchment that was still writing, columns of text that seemed to go on forever. What does that mean? Ragnarok rose, moving to stand beside the pedestal. He gestured at the parchment, and the writing slowed, organized itself into something readable. It means, Mr. Potter, that you have just become the wealthiest wizard in recorded history. He traced a finger down one column. Combined liquid assets across all 5 houses, 847,322,914 galleons. Properties spanning 3 continents. Voting seats in the Wisengamot totaling 37. Business holdings including controlling shares in the Daily Prophet, Nimbus Racing Brooms, and Slug and Jiggers Apothecary. The numbers washed over Harry. They were too big, too abstract. Millions didn't mean anything to a boy who'd never held more than pocket change. But Ragnarok wasn't finished. It also means you have enemies, Mr. Potter. Enemies who have spent the last decade assuming these vaults would remain unclaimed forever. He produced a smaller piece of parchment from his robes, this one covered in dense handwriting. This is a list of every individual and institution that has accessed your assets without authorization since your parents' death. Harry took the parchment. His hands weren't shaking, he wouldn't let them, but something cold was settling in his chest as he scanned the names. Malfoy. The name appeared 17 times. Dumbledore. Twice, both times accessing the Potter Trust Vault to redirect funds. The Ministry of Magic itself, drawing from House Black accounts to fund security operations. Dozens of others. Hundreds of transactions. 10 years of theft hidden behind legal technicalities and assumptions that no one would ever check. They stole from me, Harry said quietly. They stole from a vault whose heir was presumed dead or ignorant, Ragnarok corrected. Legally, there is a distinction. Practically. He shrugged, a surprisingly human gesture. They stole from you. Harry looked at the list again. At the Malfoy name, repeated like a drumbeat. At Dumbledore's entries, smaller but somehow more infuriating because Hagrid had just handed Harry a key that Dumbledore had possessed all along. What happens now? Ragnarok's smile was all teeth. That, Mr. Potter, depends entirely on you. You could take your gold and disappear. Purchase an island. Live comfortably for 1,000 lifetimes and never think about Britain again. He paused. Or you could learn to use what you've inherited. The wealth is significant, but it is not the true power of these houses. The true power is influence. Connections. Debts owed across generations. The ability to shape wizarding society not through force, but through leverage. Harry thought about the Dursleys. About a cupboard under the stairs. About years of being told he was worthless, unwanted, a burden to be endured. He thought about his parents, who'd apparently been important enough that people had been fighting over their legacy for a decade. He thought about the list in his hands, all those names, all those people who treated his heritage like an abandoned treasury to be looted at will. I don't want to disappear, he said. I want to understand. All of it. The houses, the politics, the enemies. He met Ragnar's eyes. And I want to know why everyone's been so certain I'd never find out. Ragnar studied him for a long moment. Whatever he was looking for, he seemed to find it. Then we have much to discuss, Lord Potter. He turned to the other goblins. Clear my schedule for the afternoon. Send word to the inheritance department that we'll need full dossiers on all 5 houses. And bring tea, the good tea, not that swill we serve to ministry officials. The goblins scattered. Ragnar gestured toward a door that definitely hadn't been there before. Shall we? The director's office was nothing like Harry expected. He'd imagined something like Gringotts itself, marble and gold and overwhelming displays of wealth. Instead, Ragnar led him into a room that could have belonged to any scholar in any age. Bookshelves covered 3 walls, stuffed with volumes in languages Harry didn't recognize. A massive desk dominated the center, its surface buried under papers, maps, and artifacts that hummed with contained magic. The 4th wall was entirely window, looking out over an impossible vista, mountains and valleys and a sky that definitely wasn't London's. A memory, Ragnar said, noticing Harry's gaze. The Goblin Highlands, before the last war. A reminder of what we lost to wizard aggression. He settled into a chair behind the desk that made him look less like a banker and more like a general. And what we gained by learning to fight differently. Harry took the seat across from him. It was sized for humans, slightly too large for a goblin, slightly too small for a full-grown wizard. Deliberately uncomfortable for everyone. You expected me to come, Harry said. It wasn't a question. I hoped. Ragnar steepled his fingers. Your parents were clients of this institution for their entire lives. Your grandparents before them. The Potter family has maintained accounts with Gringotts since before the Ministry of Magic existed. He paused. We take such relationships seriously. When your parents were killed and their son vanished into the Muggle world, there were concerns. Concerns about your investment. Concerns about a child entrusted to people who would ensure he never learned his own name. Ragnar's tone sharpened. Do you know how your placement with the Dursleys was arranged, Mr. Potter? Harry shook his head. Neither do we. No legal proceeding. No guardianship hearing. No notification to Gringotts as the Potter estate managers. One day James and Lily Potter were alive, valued clients with comprehensive estate plans. The next day they were dead, and their son had been deposited on a Muggle doorstep like an unwanted package. Ragnar's eyes glittered. Albus Dumbledore signed the authorization. No one else was consulted. The cold feeling in Harry's chest intensified. Why would he do that? That is the question, isn't it? Ragnar leaned back. Dumbledore claimed concern for your safety. The remnants of the Dark Lord's followers were still active, placing you with magical guardians would have made you a target. A reasonable argument, on its surface. But your parents will specify exactly who should receive custody if they died. Sirius Black, your godfather, currently imprisoned in Azkaban without trial, which is its own fascinating irregularity. Alice Longbottom, your godmother, incapacitated before she could claim you. Minerva McGonagall, specifically mentioned as a backup guardian. Remus Lupin, a close family friend. Ragnar spread his hands. For options, any of whom would have raised you within the magical world, aware of your heritage. Dumbledore chose none of them. Instead, he selected Petunia Dursley, a woman who was specifically listed in the will as someone who should never receive custody under any circumstances. Harry felt something shift inside him. Not anger, exactly. Something colder. More patient. You have my parents' will. We have all Potter family documents dating back 7 centuries. Ragnar reached into his desk and produced a thick folder. I had this prepared when the verification was requested. Your parents were thorough people, Mr. Potter. They knew they were targets. They planned accordingly. He slid the folder across the desk. Everything they wanted you to know is in there. Everything they wanted you to have is in the vaults below. Harry opened the folder. The first page was a letter, handwritten in 2 different scripts, one neat and precise, the other bold and sprawling. Dear Harry, if you're reading this, we're gone and Dumbledore has done something stupid. Don't be too hard on the old man, he means well, he just thinks he's always right, and that's a dangerous thing to think when you're as powerful as he is. We don't have time to explain everything. The war is heating up, and we've just received intelligence that puts us at the top of someone's list. But there are things you need to know. Harry stopped reading. His vision had gone blurry, and he realized with distant surprise that he was crying. Not sobbing, just a quiet leaking of tears he couldn't control. His parents had written this. His mother's precise handwriting, his father's bold scrawl. They'd known they might die. They'd prepared this letter for him. And someone had made sure he never received it. Take your time, Ragnarok said quietly. Harry wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. No. I need to understand what I'm dealing with before I can afford to feel anything. He looked at the folder, at the pages waiting beneath that first letter. Tell me about the houses. All 5 of them. What I've inherited and what it means. Ragnarok nodded slowly. Very well. Let us begin with what you know. House Potter. The Potters have been a noble house for 6 centuries, Ragnarok said, pulling a ledger from the stack on his desk. Before that, they were simply wealthy, merchants and craftsmen who accumulated gold through talent rather than title. The elevation came during the Goblin rebellions of the 1400s, when Hardwin Potter negotiated the treaty that ended the Third Conflict. A wizard who negotiated for goblins. A wizard who recognized that endless war benefited no one. Ragnarok's expression flickered with something like respect. The Ministry wanted extermination. The goblins wanted independence. Hardwin Potter found a middle path, autonomy in exchange for non-aggression, with Gringotts established as neutral ground. He was rewarded with a noble title and the gratitude of the Goblin nation. He paused. We do not forget our debts, Mr. Potter. Even after 600 years. Harry filed that away. What about the others? House Black. Your grandmother was Doria Black, sister to the main line. When she married Charles Potter, she retained her inheritance rights but they were considered secondary to her brothers. Orion Black, the most recent patriarch, died without specifying his heir clearly. His eldest son, Sirius, was disowned and imprisoned. His younger son, Regulus, died during the war. The title and assets defaulted to the nearest eligible blood relative. Ragnarok smiled thinly. You, through Doria's line. Even though my grandmother married out of the family. Black inheritance law is baroque. But specific. Blood matters more than name. You are the last Black of eligible lineage. He turned to another ledger. House Black assets are substantial, 200 million galleons liquid, properties across Europe, and considerable political influence despite recent scandals. The Black seat on the Wisengamot has sat empty since Orion's death. Until today. 2 houses. 2 seats. Already more political power than most families accumulated in generations. Peveril, Harry said. Ragnarok's expression shifted. For the first time, Harry saw something like uncertainty in those ancient eyes. House Peveril is complicated. The family was believed extinct for 500 years. The last known Peveril died in 1492, and the bloodline was thought to have ended with him. He set down his quill. Except it didn't. The Peveril line continued through female descendants who married into other houses. Your family, the Potters, carried the blood without knowing its significance. The inheritance was dormant, waiting for someone whose blood ran pure enough to reactivate the claim. And that's me. Your father carried Peveril blood through his mother's line. Your mother, despite being Muggle-born, carried magical ancestry that no one suspected, a squib branch of an old family that maintained just enough magic to matter. Ragnar met Harry's eyes. "You are, Mr. Potter, the first person in 5 centuries whose blood satisfies every condition for the Peveril inheritance. The magic itself recognized you during verification." Harry thought about the symbol he'd seen, the triangle, circle, and line. What does the Peveril inheritance include? The Peveril vault has been sealed since 1492. Not even goblins have entered it. The wards respond only to the true heir. Ragnar paused. What we know is legend more than fact. The Peveril brothers were said to possess artifacts of extraordinary power, objects that death itself had blessed. Whether this is metaphor or truth, I cannot say. What I can tell you is that the vault exists, it contains something, and you are the only person alive who can open it. That was unsettling. Harry moved on. Slytherin. Right of conquest. Ragnar's tone was matter-of-fact. When Voldemort attacked your family, he held the Slytherin inheritance by blood descent. When his curse rebounded and his power was broken, the magical contract of conquest activated. You defeated the heir of Slytherin, therefore, you became the heir of Slytherin. I was 15 months old. Magic does not concern itself with age, Mr. Potter. Only with results. Ragnar pulled out a thinner ledger, most of it blank. The Slytherin vault has been nearly empty for centuries. Voldemort's ancestors sold most assets generations ago. What remains is primarily symbolic, the title, the Wisengamot seat, and claim to certain artifacts that Salazar Slytherin hid within Hogwarts itself. The founder's personal treasures, hidden somewhere in the school Harry would be attending in a few weeks. That was worth remembering. And House Emery's? Ragnar set down all his papers. When he spoke again, his voice was different, quieter, almost reverent. House Emery's has not had a claimant in 400 years. The bloodline was thought completely extinct, not merely dormant. The last Emerys died in 1589, and the vault was sealed with wards that would only open for true blood descent. He looked at Harry with something approaching awe. Your mother's ancestry, Mr. Potter. The squib branch we identified traces back further than we knew. Through marriage, through circumstance, through pure chance, her blood carried the Emery's line. I've never heard of House Emery's. No. You wouldn't have. Ragnar stood, moving to the window that showed the impossible mountains. Emery's is an old name. Very old. Before there was a Britain, before there were wizards as we know them, there was a man who could command magic itself. He wore many names across many ages. The Celts called him Merlin. The Romans called him Ambrosius. Your history books call him Merlin. Harry stopped breathing. House Emery's, Ragnar said quietly, is the House of Merlin. And you, Mr. Potter, are his last living descendant. The tea arrived, but Harry barely noticed. His mind was still reeling, trying to fit together pieces that shouldn't fit. Merlin. He was a descendant of Merlin. I don't understand, he said finally. How could no one know this? My mother was Muggle-born, everyone said so. How could she be descended from the most famous wizard who ever lived? Because the Emery's line bred true for magic only rarely. Ragnar poured tea with hands that were perfectly steady. Merlin's children were powerful, but his grandchildren less so, and each generation diluted the gift further. By the 1500s, the family produced squibs more often than wizards. The magical world forgot about them. They married into Muggle families, lived Muggle lives, became invisible. But the blood remained. Blood always remains. It merely waits for the right combination. Ragnar handed Harry a cup. Your mother was an anomaly, a Muggle born with enough latent magic to reactivate capabilities that had been dormant for generations. Your father was an anomaly, a pureblood whose ancestors included both Peveril and Potter blood in unusually pure concentrations. When they had a child together, the bloodlines combined. Precisely. You are the product of magical coincidences so unlikely that most arithmencers would call them impossible. And yet here you sit, heir to 5 houses, descendant of founders and legends. Ragnar sipped his own tea. The question is, what will you do with it? Harry stared into his cup. The tea was excellent, rich and complex, nothing like the weak stuff Aunt Petunia served to impress guests. He could taste honey and something floral, something that made his thoughts sharper instead of duller. You said I have enemies, he said slowly. People who've been stealing from me for 10 years. People who assumed I'd never find out. He looked up. What happens when they learn I know? Some will attempt to negotiate. The intelligent ones will recognize that their position has become untenable and will seek the best terms they can get. Ragnar set down his cup. Others will try to suppress the information. Delegitimize your claims. Find legal technicalities to delay your inheritance. And some will try to kill me. Almost certainly. Ragnar didn't flinch from it. You have accumulated, through no effort of your own, enough power to reshape magical Britain. There are people who have spent decades building influence that your mere existence threatens. They will not accept that quietly. Harry thought about the list. About 17 entries with the Malfoy name. About Dumbledore's unauthorized access to his trust fund. About whoever had decided that Harry Potter should grow up ignorant and powerless in a cupboard under the stairs. I was supposed to stay small, he said quietly. Grateful for whatever scraps I was given. Never asking questions about where I came from or what I was owed. Yes. Someone planned this. Not just Dumbledore, he's not clever enough to think this far ahead. But someone looked at the boy who lived and decided that he needed to be controllable. Humble. Dependent on others for every scrap of information about his own life. An astute observation. Ragnar's eyes glittered with approval. The question is, what do you intend to do about it? Harry drained his tea and set the cup aside. I intend to learn, he said. Everything about the houses I've inherited. Everything about the people who stole from me. Everything about the political landscape I've apparently been dropped into. He met Ragnar's ancient gaze. And then I intend to make decisions from a position of knowledge instead of ignorance. A wise approach. Ragnar produced a small silver bell from his desk. I can provide tutors. Goblin advisors who can teach you history, politics, finance, the tools you'll need to wield your inheritance effectively. I can also provide something more valuable, time. Time. You are expected at Hogwarts in 24 days. In that time, you will need to acquire school supplies, arrange appropriate living quarters, and present yourself to the magical world as the heir to 5 noble houses. Ragnar's smile was sharp. I suggest we use those days efficiently. The bell chimed once, and the door opened. A goblin entered carrying a stack of documents that reached his chin. Dossiers on houses Potter, Black, Peveril, Slytherin, and Emery's, Ragnar said. Complete financial records. Political analyses. Lists of allies, enemies, and unknowns. You have much reading ahead of you, Mr. Potter. Harry took the stack. It was heavier than it looked, not just in weight, but in significance. One more thing, he said. The list of people who accessed my vaults. What can I do about them legally? That depends on the severity of the offense. Ragnar produced another document. Unauthorized withdrawals under 10,000 galleons can be treated as administrative errors, easily resolved through repayment agreements. Larger amounts constitute theft, punishable by asset seizure and potential imprisonment. And in cases where the unauthorized access was used to influence political outcomes or manipulate the heir's circumstances. Treason. Against a noble house. Yes. The old laws are quite specific. Ragnar's expression was predatory now. Lucius Malfoy, for example, used his unauthorized access to Potter assets to fund a campaign that resulted in 3 ministry appointments favorable to his interests. Under the Charter of 1612, that constitutes appropriation of noble influence, a crime punishable by forfeiture of all assets gained thereby. Harry looked at the document. At Malfoy's name, repeated again and again. "I want everything you have on the Malfoys," he said. Every transaction, every connection, every secret they thought was buried. "It will be done." Ragnar's smile was all teeth. "I believe, Mr. Potter, that this is the beginning of a very profitable relationship." Hagrid was waiting in the main hall, shifting nervously from foot to foot. He clutched a small package wrapped in brown paper, the secret Hogwarts business, presumably, and his eyes went wide when he saw Harry emerge. For good reason. Harry had entered Gringotts in Dudley's cast-offs, looking like exactly what he was, a neglected orphan brought to the magical world for the first time. He emerged in robes of midnight black trimmed with silver, cut to his frame by goblin tailors who worked with magical speed. His hair was still untamable, but somehow it looked deliberate now, stylish rather than messy. And on his right hand, he wore a ring that hadn't existed an hour ago, the Potter signet, a golden band bearing the Stagan flames of his house. Ragnar had insisted. "You must look like what you are," he'd said. "Let no one mistake you for anything less." "Harry?" Hagrid's voice was uncertain. "Blimey, what happened down there?" "I learned some things." Harry kept his voice calm, friendly even. Hagrid had been kind to him. Had given him his first birthday cake, his first present from the magical world. Whatever role Hagrid played in other people's plans, Harry didn't think he was deliberately malicious. But he also didn't think Hagrid was capable of keeping secrets. Things. What kind of things? Family things. Harry smiled, a careful, controlled expression. "Did you know my grandmother was a black?" It came up during the inheritance verification. Hagrid's face went through several colors. "Inheritance verification?" "Harry, yeah, we're just supposed to get some gold fair school supplies, and I did." Harry held up a pouch that clinked with coins. "But it turns out there was some confusion about my accounts. The goblins helped me sort it out." He could see Hagrid wrestling with this. The groundskeeper wasn't stupid, not exactly, but he thought in straight lines, and Harry was speaking in curves. "I should tell Dumbledore," Hagrid muttered. "He'll want to know, I'm sure he will." Harry's smile didn't waver. "But I'd hate to bother the headmaster before term even starts." "I'm sure it can wait." Hagrid hesitated. Harry could almost see the competing loyalties playing out behind his eyes, his devotion to Dumbledore, his affection for Harry, his uncertainty about what exactly had happened in the depths of Gringotts. "Right," Hagrid said finally. "Right, suppose you're right. Now, we've still got your shopping to do, wand, books, cauldron, all that. Shall we get to it? Lead the way." They stepped out into Diagon Alley, and Harry felt the afternoon sun on his face. The street was crowded with witches and wizards going about their business, and more than a few turned to look as he passed. Not at his scar, at his robes. At the signet ring glinting on his finger. At the four-goblin honor guard that had materialized behind him without being asked. He was supposed to stay small, he reminded himself. Ignorant. Controllable. He was done being what other people expected. The wand shop was called Ollivander's, and it smelled of dust and possibility. Hagrid had offered to wait outside, gets a bit cramped in there, and Harry had agreed, sensing that the groundskeeper needed time to process what he'd seen. The honor guard remained outside as well, taking positions at either side of the door that made their function unmistakable. Inside, the shop was dim and crowded with shelves that stretched toward an unseen ceiling. Thousands of narrow boxes were stacked everywhere, covered in dust that sparkled faintly in the light from the grimy window. "Good afternoon," said a soft voice. Harry turned. An old man stood behind a counter that definitely hadn't been there a moment ago. His pale eyes were wide and unblinking, like moons in the gloom. "Mr. Potter." Ollivander moved closer, examining Harry with an intensity that should have been uncomfortable. "I wondered when I'd see you. You have your mother's eyes." "So I've been told." "Yes." Ollivander's gaze dropped to the ring on Harry's finger, and something flickered in his expression: surprise? Recognition? But not, it seems, her circumstances. The Potter signet. I had not expected to see that for some years yet. Circumstances change. Indeed they do. Ollivander's smile was peculiar, knowing and ancient and slightly mad. Indeed they do. Now, which is your wand arm? Right. A tape measure flew from behind the counter and began measuring Harry of its own accord, arm length, finger span, the distance between nostrils and eyebrows. Ollivander watched it work while pulling boxes from shelves with seemingly random selection. "Every Ollivander wand has a core of a powerful magical substance, Mr. Potter. Phoenix feathers, unicorn hairs, dragon heartstrings. No two wands are exactly alike, because no two cores come from exactly the same creature. And of course, the wand chooses the wizard." He handed Harry a pale wooden wand. "Beechwood and dragon heartstring. 9 inches. Nice and flexible. Give it a wave." Harry waved. Nothing happened. "No, no." Ollivander snatched it back, already offering another. "Maple and phoenix feather. 7 inches. Quite whippy. Try this." Again, nothing. They continued for several minutes, ebony and unicorn hair, walnut and dragon heartstring, combinations Harry lost track of. Each time, Ollivander grew more animated rather than frustrated, muttering to himself about tricky customers and unusual combinations. Then he stopped. His pale eyes went wide, fixed on something only he could see. "I wonder," he said softly. "Yes, I wonder." He disappeared into the back of the shop. When he returned, he carried a single box, older than the others, the wood darkened with age. "Holly and phoenix feather. 11 inches. Nice and supple." He opened the box with something approaching reverence. "An unusual combination. I never expected to find a match for this wand." Harry took it. The effect was immediate. Warmth flooded through his fingers, up his arm, into his chest. Red and gold sparks erupted from the wand's tip, dancing in the dusty air like celebratory fireworks. "Oh, bravo!" Ollivander clapped his hands. "Yes, yes, very good. But curious. Very curious." "What's curious?" Ollivander's eyes gleamed. "The phoenix whose tail feather resides in your wand gave another feather, just one other. It is very curious that you should be destined for this wand when its brother gave you that scar." The warmth in Harry's chest turned cold. "You mean Voldemort?" "We do not speak that name." The word seemed automatic, almost reflexive. Ollivander caught himself, and his expression shifted to something more calculating. "But yes. The wand that did such terrible things was 11 inches, made of you. The brother wand to yours." Harry looked at the holly wand in his hand. At the connection it represented, to his parents' killer, to his own nature, to a destiny he hadn't chosen. "Does that mean something?" he asked. "Being connected to his wand?" "Wands choose their wizards, Mr. Potter. They recognize something in us, potential, perhaps. Destiny." Ollivander leaned closer. "I think we must expect great things from you. After all, he who must not be named did great things." "Terrible, yes, but great." Harry held the wandmaker's gaze. "Voldemort. I beg your pardon. His name is Voldemort." Harry tucked the wand into his sleeve. "And I don't intend to be afraid of a name, or the man who owned it. He paid for the wand, 7 galleons from a fortune of hundreds of millions, and walked out into the afternoon light." The goblins fell into step behind him. Hagrid hurried over, relief evident on his face. "Got your wand, then. Good, good. We should get your books next. Flourish and Blots is just down the way, Hagrid. Harry's voice was quiet, but something in it made the groundskeeper stop. I need you to deliver a message to Professor Dumbledore. A message? Harry, I told ya, I don't know if. Tell him that Harry Potter thanks him for his concern over the years. Harry's eyes were steady. And tell him that I'll be handling my own affairs from now on. He didn't wait for a response. The crowd parted as he walked, eyes drawn to the robes and the ring and the goblin escort that followed a boy who'd been an orphan this morning and was something else entirely now. Behind him, Hagrid stood frozen, the secret package clutched in his hands, watching everything he'd been told to expect unravel in real time. The rest of the shopping passed in a blur of efficiency. Books at Flourish and Blots, Harry purchased not just the required texts, but histories of the Wisengamot, biographies of notable families, and a comprehensive guide to magical law. The clerk's eyes went wide at the stack, wider still when Harry paid without blinking. Cauldrons and scales at Potage's. Telescope and brass instruments at Wiseacres. A trunk with 7 compartments and anti-theft wards at Briggs Luggage, where the owner personally helped him select the best model they had. At each shop, the pattern repeated. People noticed the robes, the ring, the escort. Whispers followed Harry down the street. By the time he reached Madame Malkin's for his Hogwarts uniforms, half of Diagon Alley knew that something significant had happened at Gringotts. The Potter boy, they're saying, Madame Malkin murmured as she took his measurements. But you're more than that, aren't you? Just Harry, he said. For now. She smiled knowingly and didn't ask anything else. The last stop was the Owl Emporium. Harry had been told that students were allowed an owl, cat, or toad, and he'd decided immediately that he wanted an owl. Communication was power, Ragnarok had taught him that afternoon. The ability to send messages without ministry oversight was worth more than its weight in gold. The Emporium was crowded with cages, barn owls and tawny owls and great horned specimens that hooted and rustled as he walked past. But Harry found himself drawn to a different display, near the back, where a single white owl sat on a perch and watched him with amber eyes. A snowy owl. Female, judging by the markings. Beautiful in a stark, fierce way that reminded him of winter mornings when the whole world went quiet. She's been here for months, the shopkeeper said, noticing his interest. Too proud for most. Won't even look at the customers, usually. But she was looking at Harry. Her head tilted as he approached, and those amber eyes studied him with an intelligence that felt almost human. Hello, Harry said quietly. The owl made a soft sound, not quite a hoot, more like an acknowledgement, and extended one wing slightly. An invitation. Harry reached out and stroked her feathers. They were impossibly soft, cool under his fingers like fresh snow. I'll take her, he said. The shopkeeper blinked. Just like that? You don't want to see the others? This one's expensive, I don't care about the price. Harry lifted his arm, and the owl stepped onto it with careful dignity. She's the one. He named her Hedwig, after a witch he'd read about in one of his new books, someone who'd been underestimated and overlooked until she changed the world. It seemed appropriate. The sun was setting over Diagon Alley when Harry finally returned to Gringotts. Hagrid had left hours ago, stammering excuses about urgent business at Hogwarts. Harry had let him go without protest. The groundskeeper would report to Dumbledore, and Dumbledore would, what? Send someone to check on Harry. Try to recover control of a situation that had already slipped away. It didn't matter. Not anymore. Ragnarok was waiting in the main hall, flanked by goblins in armor rather than banker's attire. His expression was carefully neutral, but Harry had learned to read him already. There was satisfaction in the set of his shoulders, anticipation in the gleam of his eyes. Lord Potter. Ragnarok inclined his head. You return. I had wondered if the afternoon's events might overwhelm a human of your age. I've had worse days. Harry shifted the shopping bags that floated behind him, a convenience charm provided by the goblin escort. Though not many that were this educational. Education continues, if you are willing. Ragnarok gestured toward the depths of the bank. There are matters that could not be discussed in the verification chamber. Matters that require privacy. Harry nodded and followed him down. They descended past the vault level, past the cart tracks, past layers of security that made Harry's skin prickle with contained magic. The walls changed from worked stone to natural rock, and the air grew older, heavier with the weight of centuries. Finally, they emerged into a chamber that took Harry's breath away. It was vast, cathedral vast, with a ceiling lost in darkness and walls that curved inward like the inside of a sphere. Light came from crystals embedded in the rock, blue-white and steady, illuminating a floor of polished obsidian. In the center of the floor stood a door. Just a door. Frame and hinges and handle, standing alone without walls or structure to support it. The wood was black, so dark it seemed to absorb light, and carved with symbols that hurt to look at directly. The Peveril Vault, Ragnarok said quietly. Sealed for 500 years. No goblin has passed this door since 1492. No human since a century before that. Harry approached slowly. The symbols on the door seemed to move as he drew closer, not physically, but in meaning. One moment they were abstract patterns, the next, they resolved into words he could almost understand. What's inside? Unknown. Ragnarok's voice was barely a whisper. The Peveril brothers left no records. Legend speaks of artifacts of power, objects that death itself blessed. The Deathly Hallows, they were called. But whether they still exist, whether they were ever real at all. He spread his hands. Only you can answer that question. Harry reached for the handle. The moment his fingers touched the metal, everything changed. Pain lanced through his hand, up his arm, into his chest. The symbols on the door blazed with sudden light, and Harry heard something, not with his ears but with something deeper, a voice that was ancient and cold and utterly inhuman. Blood of Peveril. Heir of the line. Why do you wake us? Harry gritted his teeth against the pain. Because it's mine. This vault, these secrets, they belong to my family. Family is blood. Blood is power. Power is death. The pain intensified. Harry felt like his bones were vibrating, like his very cells were being examined and judged. You carry the old blood. Peveril. Emrys. Potter. Black. Slytherin. The voice paused, and something like interest entered its tone. And something else. Something new. Something, scarred. The scar on Harry's forehead burned white-hot. For an instant, he was somewhere else, a ruined house, a flash of green light, a woman's scream, then it was over. The door swung open. Beyond it lay darkness so complete it seemed solid. Harry couldn't see anything inside, not with his eyes. But he could feel something. Presences, waiting. Patient as stone. Enter, heir of death. Claim what is yours. Harry looked at Ragnarok, who stood frozen at the chamber's edge. The ancient goblin's face was pale, his eyes wide with something Harry had never expected to see there. Fear. Lord Potter, Ragnarok said hoarsely. Perhaps we should wait. Prepare properly. This vault has not been opened in 5 centuries, there is no telling what, there's no time, Harry said. He didn't know where the certainty came from, but it was absolute. Whatever's in there, it's been waiting for me specifically. If I turn back now, I might never get another chance. He stepped through the door. The darkness wrapped around him like a living thing. For a moment, Harry couldn't see, couldn't hear, couldn't feel anything except the absolute absence of sensation. Then, slowly, light began to emerge. Not the blue-white crystals from outside. This light was different, warm, golden, pulsing gently like a heartbeat. It came from 3 objects arranged on a pedestal in the center of an otherwise empty room. A wand. A stone. A cloak. Harry recognized them immediately, though he'd never seen them before, never read about them, had no logical way of knowing what they were. The Elder Wand, most powerful wand in existence, passed from hand to hand through conquest and blood. The Resurrection Stone, capable of calling forth the shadows of the dead, of speaking with those who'd passed beyond. The Cloak of Invisibility, true invisibility, not charm-worked fabric, but the genuine article woven from death's own gift. The Deathly Hallows. You know us, the voice said, and Harry realized it came from the objects themselves, or from whatever resided within them. Your blood remembers, even if your mind does not. I know the stories, Harry said carefully. 3 brothers who met death on a road. 3 gifts given as reward. 3 artifacts of power. Stories. The voice was amused. Mortals love their stories. They wrap truth in narrative until it becomes something safe, something manageable. The reality was both simpler and more complex. Then tell me the reality. The golden light pulsed, and suddenly Harry saw, not with his eyes but with something deeper. Images flooded his mind. 3 figures standing at a crossroads, not meeting death but becoming it. A transformation. An ascension. Mortal men who touched something beyond mortality and were changed forever. The Peverills were the first true wizards, the voice said. Before them, magic was wild. Uncontrolled. They learned to shape it, to channel it through will and symbol and sacrifice. But that kind of power requires payment. What kind of payment? Life. Death. The boundaries between them. The images shifted, showing the brothers growing old, growing strange. They became something more than human. Something less. They could not die as mortals die, but they could not live as mortals live. Eventually, they chose to end themselves, to seal their power in objects that would wait for another who carried their blood. Me. You are the first in 5 centuries whose blood runs true enough to open this door. The first with potential enough to wield what we contain. The voice paused. But potential is not destiny, young heir. The Hallows are not toys, not weapons to be wielded carelessly. They are aspects of fundamental forces, creation, preservation, destruction. In the wrong hands, they could unmake the world. Harry looked at the 3 objects, feeling their power pulse against his senses. He could take them. Right now, nothing was stopping him. He could walk out of this vault the master of death itself. But something held him back. I'm 11 years old, he said quietly. I learned I was a wizard 12 hours ago. Whatever these things are, whatever power they represent, I'm not ready for them. Silence. Then, impossibly, something like approval entered the voice. Wisdom, it said. So rare in your kind. So precious. The golden light shifted, and the pedestal seemed to withdraw slightly, becoming more distant without moving. The Hallows will wait, young heir. They have waited 5 centuries, they can wait a few years more. But we offer you something else. A gift for the wisdom you have shown. One of the objects lifted from the pedestal, the cloak. It drifted toward Harry like a living thing, settling around his shoulders with a weight that was almost affectionate. This cloak was given to your ancestor Ignotus Peveril. It has passed through your family for generations, though the knowledge of its true nature was lost. Take it. It is yours by blood and by right. The fabric was softer than anything Harry had ever touched, lighter than air, and yet somehow substantial. When he looked down at himself, he could see through his own body, true invisibility, perfect and complete. What about the others? The wand answers to power. When you are strong enough to claim it, it will come to you, or you will find it, as so many before you have. The voice grew somber. The stone is different. It was created from grief, from the desire to undo death itself. That desire nearly destroyed its first wielder and has corrupted everyone who has used it since. Leave it here, young heir. Let it sleep. And if I need it someday, then you will know. But the need had better be great, because the cost of using the stone is terrible beyond imagining. The golden light began to fade. The pedestal, with its remaining two objects, withdrew into shadow. Go now, heir of Peveril. Learn. Grow. Become worthy of what waits for you here. A final pulse of warmth, almost paternal. And when the time comes, when death's hand brushes your shoulder and you must choose between mortality and transcendence, remember this conversation. Remember that power without wisdom is simply a more spectacular form of destruction. The darkness closed in again. Harry felt himself being drawn backward, through the door, into the crystal-lit chamber where Ragnarok still waited. When he emerged, the door was already closing behind him. Ragnarok stared at him with undisguised astonishment. You survived. Was that in doubt? Harry pulled the cloak tighter around his shoulders. It was visible now, appearing to be ordinary fabric unless you knew better. The Peveril Vault has a reputation. Those who enter uninvited do not return. Ragnarok's eyes dropped to the cloak. But you emerge not only alive but bearing a halo. The cloak of invisibility, if I am not mistaken. You're not. Harry stroked the fabric. Family heirloom, apparently. It was passed down through the Potters, but the knowledge was lost. And the other halos? The legends speak of 3. Still inside. Waiting. Harry met the ancient goblin's eyes. I wasn't ready for them. Not yet. Ragnarok was silent for a long moment. Then, slowly, he nodded. You continue to surprise me, Lord Potter. Most who enter a vault containing artifacts of power emerge desperate to claim everything they can. You entered the most dangerous vault in existence and came out with restraint. I learned early that grabbing everything in sight usually gets you caught. Harry started walking toward the exit, and Ragnarok fell into step beside him. Besides, what's the point of having power if you destroy yourself trying to use it? A practical philosophy. It will serve you well in the games ahead. They rode the carts back to the surface in contemplative silence. Harry's mind was full, too full, spinning with everything he'd learned, everything that had changed. 12 hours ago, he'd been Harry Potter, the boy under the stairs. Now he was lord of 5 noble houses, heir to unimaginable wealth, and, apparently, the descendant of death itself. It was a lot to process. But beneath the chaos, something else was settling into place. A cold, patient clarity that felt almost foreign. He had enemies. People who'd stolen from him, who'd hidden his heritage, who'd planned to keep him ignorant and controllable. They'd had 10 years to consolidate their positions, to assume the Potter fortune would remain untapped forever. They were wrong. And Harry was going to show them exactly how wrong they were. The Leaky Cauldron was quiet at this hour, most of its patrons either gone home or moved on to other evening activities. Harry had taken a room, the best in the house, though that wasn't saying much, and now sat at the window, watching the London night through grimy glass. On the bed behind him, the documents Ragnarok had provided were spread out in careful stacks. Financial records. Political analyses. Genealogies. Lists of allies, enemies, and unknowns. And the letter from his parents, which he'd read 3 more times since leaving Gringotts. They killed us because we knew too much, his father had written. Not just about the Dark Lord, about what was behind him. The old families. The old power. They've been manipulating magical Britain for centuries, and they don't like people asking questions. If you're reading this, someone failed to keep you ignorant. Good. Stay that way. Trust the goblins, they have their own agenda, but it aligns with ours more often than not. Trust yourself, you're a Potter, and Potters have always been survivors. Don't trust Dumbledore completely. He's not evil, but he's certain he's right about everything, and that kind of certainty is dangerous. He'll try to guide you where he thinks you should go. Sometimes that's the right direction. Sometimes it isn't. And Harry, whatever happens, whatever you learn, remember this: we loved you. We love you still. Death isn't an ending, not really. It's just a door. Give them hell, son. Harry looked at the ring on his finger. The Potter's signet, warm with generations of family magic. Tomorrow, he would begin learning everything he needed to know. Politics, finance, magical law. How to leverage his inheritance into something more than numbers in a ledger. How to identify his enemies and neutralize them before they could move against him. But tonight, just for tonight, he allowed himself to feel the weight of what he'd lost. Parents who'd loved him. A heritage that should have been his birthright. 10 years stolen by people who thought they knew better. Hedwig hooted softly from her perch, amber eyes reflecting the moonlight. It's going to be different now, Harry told her quietly. I'm not going to be what they expected. I'm not going to stay small and grateful and ignorant. He pulled the cloak around his shoulders, feeling its ancient power settle against his skin. I'm going to be what they were afraid of. The moon rose over London, and Harry Potter, Lord of Houses Potter, Black, Peveril, Slytherin, and Emrys, heir to the Deathly Hallows, the wealthiest wizard in recorded history, finally allowed himself to sleep. Tomorrow, the games would begin. He woke to knocking. Soft at first, almost apologetic, but persistent. Harry reached for his wand before his eyes were fully open, an instinct he didn't remember developing, and was on his feet by the time his vision cleared. Early morning light filtered through the grimy windows. Hedwig was alert on her perch, watching the door with predatory attention. Who is it? Grip Hook, Lord Potter. The voice was familiar, the goblin who'd escorted him to verification. Director Ragnarok sends his compliments and wishes to inform you that you have a visitor. Harry checked the time, barely past 7, and frowned. What kind of visitor arrives at this hour? The kind who traveled through the night to reach you, my lord. Director Ragnarok believes you will want to meet them, but stresses that the choice is entirely yours. Harry dressed quickly, tucking the cloak into an inner pocket of his robes. Whatever was happening, it was probably better to face it looking like a lord rather than an orphan. When he opened the door, Grip Hook was waiting with an expression that mixed professional neutrality with barely concealed interest. The visitor awaits in private meeting room 3, he said. This way, my lord. They descended through the leaky cauldron's back entrance into Gringotts public halls, then turned into a corridor Harry hadn't noticed before. The meeting rooms were smaller than Ragnarok's office but no less impressive, marble walls, enchanted windows showing various landscapes, furniture that probably cost more than most wizards earned in a year. Room 3 held a single occupant. She was young, Harry's age or close to it, with blonde hair so pale it was almost silver and eyes the color of Arctic ice. Her robes were expensive, obviously tailored, in a shade of deep blue that matched the Greengrass family crest embroidered on her collar. Harry recognized the name from his reading. House Greengrass was one of the Sacred 28, traditionally neutral in political conflicts, known for their wealth and their careful non-alignment. The girl rose when he entered, her movements precise and controlled. Lord Potter. Thank you for seeing me. Miss. Harry waited. Greengrass. Daphne Greengrass. Her eyes flicked to his signet ring, then back to his face. Heir to House Greengrass, though I won't hold the title formally for another 7 years. You traveled through the night to meet me. That suggests urgency. It suggests intelligence. Daphne's expression didn't waver. News of your emergence has already reached certain ears. By tomorrow, all of magical Britain will know what happened at Gringotts. I wanted to speak with you before the crowds arrived. Harry settled into the chair across from her. Speak, then. You've inherited 5 noble houses. Combined political weight that hasn't existed in centuries. Wealth that makes the Malfoys look like shopkeepers. She leaned forward slightly. You've also made enemies of some of the most powerful people in Britain, people who've been looting your vaults for a decade. You're well informed. My family makes a business of being well informed. It's how we've survived while other houses burned themselves out taking sides. Daphne's eyes held his. I'm here to offer you something that none of the people currently scrambling to reach you can provide. And what's that? Perspective. She spread her hands. My family has no dog in the fight between the old factions. We've watched the power struggles for generations without participating. We know where the bodies are buried, sometimes literally. And we know what happens to people who accumulate your kind of influence without understanding the landscape. They get destroyed. They get destroyed, she agreed. Usually within a year. The magical world doesn't like disruption. It definitely doesn't like an 11-year-old holding more power than most adults ever dream of. Harry studied her. There was no fear in those ice-blue eyes, no sycophancy, no barely concealed agenda leaking through her expression. Just calm assessment and careful intelligence. Why help me? He asked. What does House Greengrass gain? Alliance with the winning side. Daphne's answer was immediate. I don't know if you'll be that side yet, it's too early to tell. But you're the most interesting variable to enter British politics in 50 years, and I'd rather be positioned to benefit from that than scrambling to catch up later. Honest. Always. It's the only currency that holds value long-term. Harry considered. He could dismiss her, send her away, handle things alone, trust only the goblins and his own judgment. It was the safe play. The cautious approach. But something in him recognized something in her. The same calculation he ran constantly, assessing threats and opportunities. The same careful mask hiding genuine intelligence. The same exhaustion with a world that expected them to be less than they were. What did you have in mind? Daphne's smile was small but genuine. Breakfast, to start. Then an education in who's going to try to kill you, and why, and how we might stop them. Harry rose. Lead the way, Miss Greengrass. Daphne. She stood as well. If we're going to be allies, first names seem appropriate. Harry, then. They walked out of the meeting room together, two heirs in a world that had no idea what was coming. Breakfast was served in a private dining room that Gringotts apparently maintained for exactly these occasions. The food was excellent. Harry hadn't realized how hungry he was until he started eating, and the conversation was better. Daphne talked while they ate, painting a picture of magical Britain that none of his books had captured. The ministry is theoretically democratic, but in practice, a handful of families control everything. The Sacred 28 used to be the power block, but they've fragmented over the centuries. Now you've got three main factions. Which are? The progressives, mostly half-bloods and muggleborns who want to modernize, integrate more with the non-magical world. They've got numbers but not much political weight. The traditionalists, old families who want to preserve the status quo, keep muggleborns in their place, maintain blood purity. They've got wealth and connections but shrinking populations. And the third? The neutrals. My family, a few others. We play both sides, gather information, make ourselves useful enough that neither faction wants to antagonize us. Daphne spread butter on toast with precise movements. It's not a glamorous position, but it's a survivable one. Where did the Potters fall? Interesting question. She set down her knife. Your grandparents were traditionalists, pure bloodline, old money, all the usual credentials. Your father broke with that when he married your mother. Suddenly the Potters were blood traitors, allied with Dumbledore's lot, fighting the Dark Lord alongside muggleborns and werewolves. And now? And now you're a contradiction. Heir to Slytherin itself, which should make you the ultimate traditionalist figurehead. But also Potter, Black, Peveril, houses with complicated legacies that don't fit neatly into any camp. Daphne's eyes glittered. An heir to Emery's, which is going to terrify absolutely everyone. Why? Because Merlin wasn't just powerful, he was transformative. He's the one who established the Statute of Secrecy, who founded the Waisengamot, who shaped magical Britain into what it became. Every major institution traces back to him somehow. She leaned forward. And now his last descendant has emerged with more combined political power than anyone in centuries. The implications are significant. Harry processed this. People are going to try to use me. Everyone is going to try to use you. The progressives will want you as proof that blood doesn't matter. Look, a Muggle-born son is the heir of Merlin himself. The traditionalists will try to claim you for the opposite reason, ancient bloodlines, noble heritage, proof that pure blood always prevails. And if I refuse to be used? Then you become a threat to be eliminated. Daphne's voice was matter-of-fact. The only people who survive in magical politics are either useful or dangerous. You're already dangerous. The question is whether you can become useful enough to the right people that they protect you instead of attacking you. Harry pushed his plate aside. What would you suggest? Build a power base before anyone else can organize against you. You've got 3 weeks before Hogwarts, use them. Call in debts. Establish relationships. Make yourself valuable to people who matter. She paused. And identify the specific individuals who've been stealing from you. Handle them publicly, decisively, before they can spin the narrative. The Malfoys. Obviously. Lucius has been the primary beneficiary of abandoned vault appropriations for years. But he's not the only one. Daphne pulled a folded parchment from her robes. I took the liberty of researching likely culprits. There are 6 families who've shown suspicious financial improvements since your parents' death, improvements that track too closely with Potter, Black, and Slytherin asset movements to be coincidental. Harry took the parchment. 6 names, with annotations in precise handwriting. Malfoy, 17 documented transactions, EST 3.2 million galleons appropriated not, 8 transactions, EST 900,000 galleons Parkinson, 5 transactions, EST 400,000 galleons Crabbe, 3 transactions, EST 150,000 galleons Goyle, 2 transactions, EST 80,000 galleons Fudge, 12 transactions through ministry accounts, EST 2. 1 million galleons, Fudge, Harry said. The Minister of Magic. The same. Though the transactions were technically ministry appropriations for security purposes, they happened to align perfectly with his personal spending patterns. Daphne's smile was sharp. Politicians are so rarely subtle. Harry looked at the list, at the numbers, at the evidence of a decade of coordinated theft. Why are you giving me this? Because it's valuable, and I want you to remember who provided it. Daphne met his eyes. My family has stayed neutral for generations. But neutrality only works when there's balance. Right now, the traditionalists have too much power, and it's making them careless. A corrective force, someone who could shake up the established order, would be beneficial. You want me to be your corrective force. I want you to be an independent power that neither faction can control. She rose, leaving her napkin folded precisely beside her plate. What you do with that position is up to you. But I'd rather have a seat at the table than watch from outside while someone else shapes the future. Harry considered her, this girl his own age, who spoke of politics and power like a veteran player. She was dangerous, certainly. Probably manipulating him in ways he couldn't even perceive yet. But she was also the first person since Ragnarok who treated him like something other than a pawn to be moved. Partners, then, he said. At least until we see how the game develops. Daphne's smile was genuine this time, small but real. Partners. Though I should warn you, I play to win. So do I. I know. She headed for the door. That's why I traveled through the night. After Daphne left, returning to her family before her absence was noticed, Harry spent the rest of the morning with Ragnar, planning. The Malfoys first, he decided. They're the biggest threat and the most visible target. If I can handle them publicly, it sends a message to everyone else. A sound strategy. Ragnar spread documents across his desk. Lucius Malfoy is many things, but he is not a fool. He will not accept a confrontation unless he believes he holds the advantage. Then we make him think he does. Harry studied the transaction records. He doesn't know what I discovered in Gringotts. As far as he knows, I'm still an ignorant orphan who lucked into some money. He'll expect me to be intimidated, overwhelmed, easy to manipulate. And you intend to let him believe this? I intend to let him believe he's in control right up until the moment he realizes he isn't. Harry looked up. Can you arrange a meeting? Something that looks like I'm coming to negotiate, maybe asking for guidance from an experienced lord? Ragnar's smile was all teeth. You propose to bait the trap with your own apparent weakness. A goblin strategy. I learned from the best. They spent hours on the details. The meeting would be at the Potter family solicitor's office, a location that suggested Harry seeking professional help, rather than confrontation. The invitation would be carefully worded to imply that Harry was nervous, out of his depth, hoping for assistance from someone who understood pure-blood politics. Lucius Malfoy, who'd been appropriating Potter funds for years, would see exactly what he expected, a scared child who could be easily managed. He would be wrong. There's another matter, Ragnar said as evening approached. The Hogwarts situation. Dumbledore. Indeed. The headmaster has already sent 3 messages requesting meetings. His tone has progressed from concerned to insistent over the course of the day. Ragnar handed Harry a stack of parchments. He appears to believe that you are in danger and require his protection. Harry scanned the messages. They were carefully worded, full of grandfatherly concern, but the subtext was clear. Dumbledore wanted to reassert control over a situation that had escaped him. My dear Harry, the most recent one read, I must impress upon you the danger of your current path. There are forces at work that you cannot understand, threats that require experienced guidance to navigate. Please, let us meet and discuss your situation before any irreversible decisions are made. He's afraid, Harry said quietly. Of course he is. You represent something he cannot predict or control. Ragnar's eyes glittered. The question is what you intend to do about it. Harry thought about his parents' letter. Don't trust Dumbledore completely. He's not evil, but he's certain he's right about everything. Not enemies, he decided. Not yet. But not allies either. I need to understand what he wants before I decide how to handle him. A prudent approach. I would suggest avoiding direct confrontation until you've established your own position more firmly. Ragnar gathered the documents. At Hogwarts, you will be in his territory. It would be unwise to appear antagonistic while under his roof. Agreed. Harry stood, stretching muscles that had grown stiff from hours of sitting. What time is the meeting with Malfoy? 3 days hence. Friday afternoon, at the Potter solicitor's office. Ragnar rose as well. That gives you time to prepare, to study the materials we've provided, and to adjust to your new circumstances. Harry looked at the stack of documents waiting for him, at the weight of 5 houses pressing down on his 11-year-old shoulders. I'll manage, he said. Of that, Ragnar replied, I have no doubt. 3 days passed in a blur of reading, planning, and occasional moments of absolute terror. Harry spent every waking hour absorbing information. The histories of his 5 houses. The complex web of alliances and feuds that defined pure-blood politics. The legal frameworks that governed magical Britain, full of loopholes and archaic privileges that no one had bothered to update in centuries. The goblins provided tutors, ancient creatures who'd witnessed history being made and had opinions about every moment of it. They drilled him on etiquette, on negotiation tactics, on the 1,000 small signals that purebloods use to establish dominance. Never break eye contact first. Let the silence stretch, humans can't bear it as long as you can. When in doubt, ask questions instead of answering them. Daphne visited twice more, providing additional intelligence and testing his understanding. She quizzed him mercilessly on family trees, on voting blocks, on the hidden relationships that made sense of seemingly random political decisions. The Knots and Malfoys have been feuding for 3 generations, but they present a united front because of a marriage contract signed in 1823. The Parkinsons are actually broke, all their wealth is in properties they can't sell without admitting they've mortgaged everything to the goblins. The Crabs and Goyles are essentially Malfoy vassals, with no independent political will whatsoever. And Greengrass? Daphne smiled. We're exactly what we appear to be, rich, neutral, and very well informed. The most dangerous kind of player in any game. By Friday, Harry felt ready. Not confident, he wasn't stupid enough to be confident against someone like Lucius Malfoy, but prepared. He knew what he wanted, what he was risking, and what the backup plans were if everything went wrong. The Potter solicitor's office was in a building off Diagon Alley, hidden behind wards that made Muggles suddenly remember urgent appointments elsewhere. Inside, it was all dark wood and leather, portraits of ancient Potter advisors watching from the walls. Harry arrived early. He wanted to be settled, comfortable, in control of the space before his guest arrived. The chair he chose was positioned carefully, lower than the visitor's seat, suggesting deference, but angled toward the door in a way that let him see everything. His robes were fine but not ostentatious. His signet ring was visible. Every detail calibrated to project a specific image, the young lord, overwhelmed by his inheritance, seeking help from someone more experienced. At precisely 3 o'clock, the door opened. Lucius Malfoy was everything Harry expected and nothing like it at all. The man was tall, aristocratic, with pale blonde hair that swept back from a face too perfect to be entirely natural. His robes were immaculate, his cane gleaming with silver, his every movement precise and controlled. But it was his eyes that struck Harry most. They were cold, not emotionless, but deliberately distant, watching everything like a snake deciding whether to strike. Lord Potter. Malfoy's voice was silk over steel. How kind of you to invite me. Lord Malfoy. Harry didn't rise, didn't offer his hand. Please, sit. A flicker of something crossed Malfoy's face, surprise, perhaps, at being given instructions rather than offering them. But he covered it smoothly, settling into the visitor's chair with elegant grace. I confess, your invitation surprised me. We've never met, and yet you reach out seeking, what, exactly? Advice? Alliance? Information, Harry said calmly. I've recently learned some things about my family's affairs. Things that have raised questions I hoped you could help answer. Oh. Malfoy's expression was perfectly neutral. What sort of questions? Harry reached into his robes and produced a sheaf of parchment, copies of the transaction records Ragnarok had provided. He set them on the desk between them. These are records of unauthorized access to Potter, Black, and Slytherin family vaults over the past decade. Financial transactions that appear to have been conducted without the knowledge or consent of the account holders. He met Malfoy's eyes. Your name appears 17 times. The silence stretched. Malfoy didn't look at the documents. His eyes stayed fixed on Harry, calculating, reassessing, adjusting to a situation that had shifted beneath him. An interesting document, he said finally. Though I fail to see its relevance. Any transactions involving those vaults would have been conducted through proper ministry channels, with appropriate authorization. The ministry has no authority over noble house assets. Harry's voice was mild. That's Section 47 of the Charter of 1612. Vault access requires either the account holder's explicit permission or blood verification of inheritance rights. You had neither. Another silence. You've done your research. Malfoy's tone had shifted, less silk, more steel. Impressive for someone your age. But surely you understand that legal technicalities are irrelevant when more important considerations are at play. The vaults were dormant. The heir was unavailable. Someone needed to ensure that such significant resources didn't simply languish. Someone needed to ensure they ended up in the right hands, you mean. If you prefer to phrase it that way. Malfoy spread his hands. The magical world is not kind to orphans, Lord Potter. I was merely managing assets that would otherwise have been wasted. Harry let the words hang in the air. Then, slowly, he smiled. Thank you for confirming that, he said. The transcription quill will have captured everything perfectly. He gestured toward the corner of the room, where a small writing implement was scratching away at a piece of parchment, goblin-made, officially registered with the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, completely admissible in court. Malfoy's face went very still. I came here expecting a negotiation, Harry continued. A frightened child seeking guidance from an experienced lord. That's what my invitation suggested, isn't it? That's the situation you thought you'd find. He leaned forward. You thought wrong. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The transcription quill scratched away, recording silence. Then, slowly, Malfoy began to laugh. It wasn't a pleasant sound, cold, crystalline, edged with something that might have been genuine admiration. You're not what I expected, Lord Potter. Not at all. He relaxed back into his chair, crossing one leg over the other. Very well. You've caught me. What do you want? Repayment, Harry said flatly. Every galleon, with interest. The goblins have calculated the total at 3,400,000, and change. A significant sum. You can afford it. Harry slid another document across the desk. I've had your finances analyzed. The appropriated funds were invested rather well, I'll give you credit for that. You've got more than enough liquid assets to settle the debt. Malfoy glanced at the document. His expression flickered, surprise, this time, genuine surprise, at the depth of information Harry had obtained. And if I refuse? Then I release the transcription to the Daily Prophet, file formal charges with the Wisengamot, and invoke the charter provisions for asset seizure. Harry's voice was still mild. The investigation alone would take years. Your social position would be destroyed. Your business relationships would collapse. And at the end of it, you'd still owe me every canute, plus penalties. You'd make an enemy of me. You've been my enemy for 10 years, Lord Malfoy. You just didn't tell me about it. Harry met his eyes. I'm offering you a way out. Clean slate. No criminal charges, no public exposure, no ongoing feud. You repay what you took, and we start fresh. And if I want more than a clean slate? Malfoy's voice had changed again, speculative now, reassessing. If I wanted to turn this unfortunate situation into something more productive? I'm listening. Malfoy uncrossed his legs, leaning forward with an intensity that hadn't been there before. You're impressive, Lord Potter. More impressive than anyone expected, including Dumbledore, who thought he'd shaped you into something manageable. His lip curled slightly. The old fool never understood that blood will tell. You're a Potter, a Black, a Slytherin. You were never going to be his pet hero. Get to the point. The point is this, I misjudged you. I assumed you were like your father, reckless, idealistic, easily manipulated. Instead, you're something else entirely. Malfoy's cold eyes gleamed. Someone I could work with. Work with how? The magical world is changing, Lord Potter. The old order is crumbling. Within a decade, the structure that has governed Britain for centuries will collapse, and something new will rise in its place. He spread his hands. I intend to help shape what that something is. You could be part of that, a partner rather than an enemy. Harry studied the man across from him. The offer was genuine, or at least genuinely intended. Malfoy saw value in Harry now, not as a victim to be exploited, but as a potential ally in whatever game he was playing. It was tempting. An alliance with the Malfoys would provide resources, connections, political cover. It would be the smart play, the practical choice. But Harry thought about his parents' letter. About a dark lord who'd served someone else's agenda. About old families and old power and people who'd been manipulating Britain for centuries. No, he said. Malfoy's expression didn't change. No. I'll take the repayment. The clean slate. But I'm not interested in partnership. Harry rose, gathering his documents. You played games with my inheritance while I grew up in a cupboard. You don't get to be my ally because you've decided I'm useful now. For a moment, just a moment, something genuine showed in Malfoy's eyes. Respect, maybe. Or recognition of something he understood too well. You'll regret this, he said quietly. Not today, not tomorrow, but eventually. You're making enemies of people who could have been friends. I'll take my chances. Harry moved toward the door, then paused. The repayment documents will arrive by Monday. You have 30 days to comply. If the deadline passes without full payment, everything I've collected goes public. He looked back over his shoulder. Enjoy your weekend, Lord Malfoy. He left without waiting for a response. Outside, in the narrow alley behind the office, Harry let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. His hands were shaking. His heart was racing. For the entire meeting, he'd projected calm, confidence, control, but underneath, he'd been terrified. One wrong word, one miscalculation, and Lucius Malfoy could have destroyed him. Instead, Harry had won. It didn't feel like victory. It felt like surviving, which, he was starting to realize, was probably the best anyone could hope for in this world. Griphook materialized from the shadows, flanked by 2 goblin guards. The meeting went well, my lord. He's going to pay. Harry steadied his voice. Full repayment within 30 days, or we go public. And his offer of alliance? Refused. Griphook's thin lips curved upward. Director Ragnarok will be pleased. He had concerns that you might be tempted by short-term gains at the expense of long-term positioning. I'm not interested in being anyone's junior partner. Harry started walking toward Gringotts, the goblins falling into step around him. Not Malfoy's. Not Dumbledore's. Not anyone's. Then what are you interested in, my lord? Harry thought about the question. About the houses he'd inherited, the enemies he'd made, the games that were only beginning. I want to understand, he said finally. Who's really in control? What they're planning. Why they've worked so hard to keep people like me ignorant. And when you understand? Harry looked at the goblin, at the ancient creature who'd seen empires rise and fall, who'd survived by being smarter than everyone who underestimated him. Then I'll decide what I want to do about it. Griphook's smile widened. A most goblin answer, Lord Potter. We will make a proper ally of you yet. They disappeared into Gringotts, leaving the alley empty except for shadows, and a rat, watching from a crack in the wall, who would have very interesting things to report to his master. Chapter 1 and Chapter 2, First Blood. The owl arrived at dawn, 3 days after the Malfoy meeting. Harry was already awake. He'd barely slept since leaving the Dursleys, his mind too full of plans and possibilities to rest properly. He'd taken over a suite of rooms at the Leaky Cauldron, transformed with goblin efficiency into something resembling a command center. Documents covered every surface. Maps of Wizarding Britain hung on the walls, marked with colored pins representing allies, enemies, and unknowns. The owl was impressive, a great horned specimen with feathers like burnished copper. It landed on the windowsill with the precision of a creature that knew its own worth and dropped a thick envelope sealed with the Malfoy crest. Harry broke the seal and read. Lord Potter, after careful consideration, I find myself unable to comply with your proposed repayment schedule. The sums in question were acquired through channels that, while perhaps unconventional, were entirely legal under ministry interpretation of the relevant statutes. I have enclosed documentation supporting this position, prepared by my solicitors. Should you wish to pursue this matter further, I suggest you direct your correspondence to them. Lucius Malfoy. Harry set down the letter and reached for the attached documents. They were impressive, 50 pages of legal argumentation, citing precedents and statutes and interpretive rulings that painted a picture of authorized access rather than theft. It was all lies, of course. Sophisticated, carefully constructed lies that would take months to dismantle in court. Malfoy was calling his bluff. Harry had expected this. The man was too experienced, too well connected, to simply capitulate because an 11-year-old had caught him with his hand in the vault. He'd had 3 days to consult advisors, analyze the situation, and develop a counter-strategy. The question was whether Harry's own strategy could adapt. He reached for fresh parchment and began to write. Daphne arrived at noon, having received Harry's urgent summons through channels they'd established during her previous visits. She looked slightly disheveled, unusual for her, suggesting she'd come quickly. The Malfoys have countered, Harry said without preamble. They're claiming the transactions were legal under ministry interpretation. I saw. Daphne settled into a chair, accepting the documents Harry passed her. My father received a copy this morning. The Malfoys are circulating their version of events to anyone who might matter. They're trying to control the narrative. Obviously. If they can establish that the transactions were authorized, or at least ambiguous enough to dispute, then your evidence becomes a legal question rather than a moral one. She flipped through the pages. Legal questions favor those with money and connections. In a court battle, they'd have the advantage. So we don't fight in court. Daphne looked up. What did you have in mind? Harry moved to the map on the wall, pointing to a cluster of red pins. The Malfoys aren't the only ones who stole from me. 6 families, plus the ministry itself through Fudge. Malfoy's the biggest target, but he's also the most prepared to defend himself. You want to go after the weaker ones first. I want to demonstrate what happens to people who thought they could rob me with impunity. Harry traced a line between the pins. The Parkinsons are nearly bankrupt, they can't afford a legal battle. The Crabs and Goyles are essentially Malfoy vassals, if I can turn them, it weakens his position. And the Knots. The Knots are complicated, Daphne said carefully. Theodore Knott, the heir, is in our year at Hogwarts. His father is a convicted Death Eater who somehow avoided Azkaban. They've got secrets that make the Malfoys look transparent. Secrets can be useful. Secrets can also be dangerous. The Knots aren't like the others, they're connected to things that go deeper than politics. She hesitated. There are rumors about an organization. Something older than the Sacred 28, more secretive than the Death Eaters. The Knots have been associated with it for generations. Harry filed that away. What kind of organization? No one knows exactly. They call themselves the Conclave of Shadows, at least, that's what the rumors say. Old families, old blood, old power. They supposedly pull strings that even the Wisengamot doesn't see. And you think the Knots are members? I think that if you go after them the same way you went after Malfoy, you might attract attention you're not ready for. Daphne met his eyes. I'm not saying don't do it. I'm saying be careful. Harry considered. The smart play was to start with the weakest targets, the Crabs, the Goyles, families with limited resources and no real power base. Build momentum before tackling the more dangerous opponents. But there was another factor. The Malfoys were circulating their narrative right now, establishing their version of events before Harry could respond. Every day he waited, their position strengthened. He needed a decisive move. Something that would shatter the narrative Malfoy was trying to build. The Parkinsons, he decided. You said they're nearly bankrupt. Their entire fortune is tied up in properties they can't sell. They've been living on credit and family reputation for years. Then they're desperate. Harry turned from the map. Desperate people make mistakes. And desperate people can be turned. The Parkinson estate was smaller than Harry expected, a manor house that had clearly seen better days, its gardens overgrown and its facade weathered by decades of neglect. The wards that should have protected it were thin, barely functional, testament to a family that couldn't afford proper maintenance. Harry arrived with grip hook and 2 goblin guards, a display of force that was probably overkill against the Parkinsons but served a purpose. Word would spread. People would talk about the young lord who traveled with armed escort, who treated even minor negotiations as potential battlegrounds. Perception was power. Ragnarok had taught him that. Lord Parkinson met them at the door personally, a bad sign for a noble family, suggesting they couldn't afford servants. He was a heavy-set man with the red-veined nose of someone who drank too much and the nervous eyes of someone who knew his situation was precarious. Lord Potter. His voice aimed for dignified and landed somewhere around anxious. An unexpected pleasure. We weren't aware you'd be visiting. I prefer to conduct important business in person. Harry stepped past him into the entry hall, not waiting for an invitation. Shall we discuss matters here, or is there somewhere more private? Parkinson's eyes darted to the goblins, to Harry's expensive robes, to the signet ring that marked him as something more than a visiting child. Whatever he saw made him decide quickly. My study. This way. The study was cramped and cluttered, shelves overflowing with documents that looked like bills and collection notices. Parkinson cleared a chair for Harry with hands that trembled slightly. I assume this is about the Gringotts matter, he said, trying to sound casual. Lord Malfoy mentioned there had been some confusion. There's no confusion. Harry produced a slim folder from his robes. 5 transactions over 4 years, totaling 400,000 galleons withdrawn from Potter accounts without authorization. Your family crest appears on each transfer. Parkinson's face went pale. There were assurances from whom? Lord Malfoy said. He stopped, realizing his mistake. Lord Malfoy told you it was safe, Harry finished. That the vaults were abandoned, the heir unavailable, the transactions untraceable. He coordinated the whole thing, didn't he? Identified targets, organized access, distributed the proceeds. Parkinson said nothing, but his silence was confirmation enough. Here's your situation, Harry continued. You owe me 400,000 galleons that you don't have. Your properties are already mortgaged to the goblins, there's nothing left to seize. If I press charges, you'll lose everything, your title, your family's reputation, your daughter's marriage prospects. Please. The word came out as barely a whisper. Lord Potter, I have a daughter. Pansy is starting Hogwarts this year. If this becomes public, I'm not interested in destroying your family. Harry let the words sink in. I'm interested in something more valuable than money. Parkinson looked up, desperate hope flickering in his bloodshot eyes. What do you want? Information. Harry leaned forward. Everything you know about how Malfoy organized the vault appropriations. Everyone who was involved. Every transaction, every communication, every detail you can remember. If I give you that, Malfoy will what? Expose you. Harry's smile was cold. He can't do that without exposing himself. And right now, he's betting that everyone involved will stay silent to protect their own positions. If one person breaks ranks, the whole thing falls apart. Parkinson's voice was hollow. The whole thing falls apart, Harry agreed. And the person who provided the information, who cooperated voluntarily, might find themselves in a much better position than those who stayed loyal to a sinking ship. Parkinson sat in silence for a long moment. Harry could see the calculations playing out behind his eyes, the fear of Malfoy's retaliation weighed against the certainty of Potter's leverage, the desperate hope that cooperation might offer a way out. If I give you what you want, he said finally, what happens to my family? Your debt is restructured. Long-term payments you can actually manage. No criminal charges, no public exposure, no damage to your daughter's prospects. Harry produced another document. I've had the terms prepared. It's more than fair. Parkinson took the parchment with trembling hands. He read it twice, his lips moving silently. This would take 30 years to repay. Your family has been living beyond its means for generations. Consider it a correction. Harry stood. You have 24 hours to decide. After that, I move on to the Crabs and Goyles with the same offer, and when they accept, your value as an informant drops considerably. He left Parkinson sitting in his cramped study, surrounded by evidence of a fortune long since squandered, holding a lifeline he couldn't afford to refuse. The Crabs broke within 6 hours. Their patriarch was a thick-necked man with more muscle than sense, who tried to bluster his way through the initial conversation before his wife, considerably sharper, dragged him aside for a whispered conference. When they returned, Lord Crabbe's defiance had evaporated. We'll cooperate, Lady Crabbe said flatly. Whatever you need. Everything about the vault appropriations. Communications, meetings, financial records. You'll have it by tomorrow. She fixed her husband with a glare that promised future consequences. My husband kept documentation. Insurance against Malfoy, in case anything went wrong. Harry hadn't expected that. Insurance? Lord Malfoy is not known for protecting his associates when situations become difficult. We wanted leverage. Her smile was thin. It seems we'll be using it differently than planned. The Goyles followed the next morning, their cooperation secured with even less effort. They were followers by nature, accustomed to supporting whoever held the most power. With both the Crabs and Parkinsons already turned, they saw which way the wind was blowing. By noon, Harry had testimony from 3 families, documentation spanning 8 years of coordinated theft, and enough evidence to destroy Lucius Malfoy's reputation, finances, and freedom. He also had something else, a pattern. Look at this, he said to Daphne, spreading the documents across his war room's main table. The timing of the appropriations. They weren't random. Daphne leaned over the papers, her pale hair falling across her face. They're clustered. Every major withdrawal happened within days of a Wisengamot vote. Not just any votes. Votes that Malfoy was trying to influence. Harry traced the connections. He used my family's money to bribe officials, fund campaigns, and purchase votes on legislation he wanted passed. That's not just theft. Daphne's voice was soft with realization. That's appropriation of noble house influence. Under the old laws, it's treason against the houses whose resources were used. Harry looked up. The Potters, the Blacks, the Slytherins. Malfoy didn't just steal gold. He stole political power. The penalties for that are severe. Harry gathered the documents. I need to see Ragnarok. This changes everything. The director of Gringotts listened to Harry's presentation in silence, his ancient eyes flickering between the evidence spread across his desk and the young lord who'd assembled it. When Harry finished, Ragnarok was quiet for a long moment. You understand what you're proposing, he said finally. Charges of this nature have not been filed in over a century. The Wisengamot will fight it, they have no interest in establishing precedents that could threaten their own members. Let them fight. Harry's voice was steady. I have documentation from 3 cooperating families. I have financial records from Gringotts itself. And I have the legal right, as heir to the affected houses, to invoke the Charter of 1612. The Charter is old law. Largely forgotten. But still binding. Harry had spent hours studying this with Daphne. Section 47 specifically addresses appropriation of noble house influence. The penalties include forfeiture of all assets gained through the appropriation, stripping of noble titles, and, in severe cases, exile from magical Britain. Ragnarok's lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. You've done your research. I had good teachers. Indeed. The director leaned back in his chair. There is one thing you have not considered, Lord Potter. If you invoke the charter and the Wisengamot convenes to hear your case, you will be required to appear in person. To present evidence, answer questions, and defend your claims against whatever arguments Malfoy's advocates devise. I understand. Do you? Ragnarok's eyes were sharp. You are 11 years old. You have been part of the magical world for less than 2 weeks. The Wisengamot chamber is filled with experienced politicians who have been playing these games for decades. They will attempt to intimidate you, confuse you, delegitimize you. And Malfoy himself will be there, with every resource at his disposal, fighting for his survival. Harry met the ancient goblin's gaze. I grew up in a cupboard under the stairs. I spent 10 years being told I was worthless, unwanted, a burden. I learned to survive by being smarter than the people who wanted to hurt me. He stood, gathering his documents. I'm not afraid of a room full of politicians. I'm not afraid of Lucius Malfoy. His voice was quiet but absolutely certain. I'm afraid of staying ignorant. I'm afraid of being controlled. I'm afraid of becoming the puppet everyone expected me to be. He looked at Ragnarok with eyes that held something far older than his years. Whatever happens in that chamber, at least I'll be fighting for myself. That's more than anyone else was ever willing to let me do. Ragnarok was silent for a long moment. Then, slowly, he rose. The formal charges will be filed by tomorrow morning, he said. The Wisengamot will be required to convene within 7 days to hear the case. I will ensure that goblin advocates are available to assist your presentation. He extended his hand, a gesture of equality that goblins rarely offered to humans. You remind me of your great-grandfather, Lord Potter. Hardwin Potter, who negotiated the Treaty of 1437 and earned the eternal friendship of the Goblin Nation. His grip was firm and cold. He was also very young when he first entered our halls. And he also refused to be what others expected. Harry shook the offered hand. What happened to him? He changed the world. Ragnarok's smile showed all his teeth. I suspect you will do the same. The news spread faster than Harry anticipated. By evening, the Daily Prophet had somehow obtained details of the upcoming Wisengamot session. Boy Who Lived To challenged prominent lord in unprecedented legal action, and speculation was running wild. Half the articles painted Harry as a confused child being manipulated by goblins. The other half suggested he was secretly a dark wizard seeking to destroy respectable pure-blood families. Neither was accurate. Neither mattered. What mattered was that everyone was watching. Everyone would be there when Harry made his case. And whatever happened, the narrative that Malfoy had been carefully constructing would be shattered. Harry was counting on that. The formal summons arrived that night, Wisengamot parchment, official seals, language so archaic it took 3 readings to parse. The session was scheduled for Friday, 5 days hence. Harry would have until then to prepare. He spent the first day reviewing every document, every piece of testimony, every legal precedent that might be relevant. Griphook provided goblin advocates who walked him through the formal procedures, how to address the chamber, when to present evidence, what objections to expect. The second day, Daphne arrived with additional intelligence. Malfoy's been busy, she said, spreading her own documents across Harry's war table. He's called in favors from half the Wisengamot. At least 15 members have already committed to voting against your charges, regardless of evidence. 15 out of how many? 50 voting seats, but only about 40 are currently filled. You'd need a simple majority to win, 21 votes. She pointed to a list of names. These are the definite opposition. These are probable allies, houses that have feuds with the Malfoys or would benefit from seeing them fall. And these? The unknowns. The swing votes. People who could go either way depending on how the session unfolds. Daphne looked up. It's going to be close, Harry. Closer than I'd like. What about the charter provisions? If I can prove appropriation of noble house influence, then the Wisengamot is legally required to impose penalties. But they'll fight the proof part tooth and nail. Malfoy's advocates will challenge every piece of evidence, question every witness, exploit every ambiguity. Harry studied the names on her list. So many variables. So many people he'd never met, whose motivations he couldn't guess, whose votes would determine whether his gambit succeeded or collapsed. I need to talk to them, he said slowly. The swing votes. Before the session. Daphne's eyebrows rose. You want to campaign? I want to understand who I'm dealing with. What they want. What would convince them? He met her eyes. You said your family knows where the bodies are buried. Time to share. The next 3 days were a blur of meetings, negotiations, and careful maneuvering. Harry visited 7 noble houses, each encounter a chess game played with words and implications. Some were hostile, viewing him as an upstart who needed to learn his place. Others were curious, intrigued by the young lord who'd emerged from nowhere to challenge one of Britain's most powerful families. A few were sympathetic. Your father was a good man, Lord Ogden told him, pouring fire whiskey with hands that trembled slightly from age. Reckless, perhaps. Too idealistic. But good. He raised his glass. If his son is half the man he was, Britain will be better for it. I'm trying to be. Then you have my vote. The old wizard drained his glass. The Malfoys have been a cancer on this body for too long. Time someone cut them out. Others were more calculating. What's in it for me? Lady Marchbanks asked bluntly. She was ancient, older than Ragnarok, according to rumor, with eyes that missed nothing. I've survived longer than most by never picking sides. Why should I start now? Because sides are being picked whether you want them to be or not. Harry kept his voice steady. Malfoy's been using stolen resources to reshape the Wisengamot for years. Every vote he bought was a vote taken from someone else. Eventually, he'll come for yours. He's already tried. Her smile was thin. I'm harder to buy than most. Then help me stop him. Not for my sake, for the institution you've spent your life serving. Harry leaned forward. The Wisengamot is supposed to be the voice of magical Britain. Not the personal tool of whoever has the deepest pockets. Marchbanks studied him for a long moment. You're young to be playing these games, Lord Potter. I'm young to be doing a lot of things. But here I am anyway. She laughed, a dry, crackling sound like old parchment. Here you are indeed. Very well. You'll have my vote, assuming your evidence is as solid as you claim. It is. We'll see. She waved a dismissive hand. Now get out. Some of us need our rest. Harry left with one more vote secured, and 1 day less to prepare. The night before the session, Daphne came to his rooms at the Leaky Cauldron. She'd never visited this late before, and her expression was different, less controlled, more uncertain. She stood in his doorway for a moment before speaking. I need to tell you something. Harry stepped aside to let her in. That sounds ominous. It might be. She moved to the window, staring out at the London night. My father had a visitor today. Someone from the conclave I mentioned. Harry went still. And? They know what you're doing. The charges, the evidence, the votes you've been gathering. She turned to face him. They're not happy. I didn't expect them to be. You don't understand. Daphne's voice was tight. The conclave doesn't just influence politics, they control things. Things that go beyond the Wisengamot, beyond the ministry. They've been managing magical Britain for centuries, and they don't like disruptions. What did they want from your father? They wanted him to warn you. To tell you to drop the charges, accept a settlement, and stop drawing attention. She hesitated. And they wanted him to tell me to stop helping you. Harry processed this. What did he say? He said he'd deliver the warning. He didn't say he'd follow their other instructions. A ghost of a smile crossed her face. My father is neutral, not spineless. He doesn't take orders from anyone. And you? I'm here, aren't I? She met his eyes. Whatever the conclave is, whatever they want, they're part of the system that's been rotting magical Britain from the inside. You're the first person in years who's actually tried to challenge that system. Her chin lifted. I didn't get involved just to back out when things got dangerous. Harry felt something shift in his chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with politics or strategy. You could have stayed away, he said quietly. Played it safe. Let me handle this alone. I could have. Her expression was unreadable. But then I wouldn't know how it ended. And I hate not knowing things. Despite everything, the pressure of tomorrow, the weight of expectations, the shadowy threats gathering at the edges of his new life, Harry laughed. Partners, he said. Partners, she agreed. Now let's go over your presentation one more time. You stumbled on the third precedent citation during practice. They worked until dawn, and Harry didn't feel tired at all. The Wisingamot chamber was everything Harry expected and nothing like he'd imagined. It occupied the lowest level of the Ministry of Magic, a vast circular room carved from ancient stone. Benches rose in tiers around a central floor, filled with witches and wizards in plum-colored robes who watched Harry's entrance with expressions ranging from curiosity to contempt. At the highest tier sat the chief warlock, Albus Dumbledore, his silver beard gleaming in the magical light, his blue eyes fixed on Harry with an intensity that felt almost physical. They hadn't spoken since Harry's emergence from Gringotts. The letters Dumbledore had sent remained unanswered. And now, here they were, facing each other across a chamber that would determine the future of magical Britain's most powerful families. Harry walked to the petitioner's podium without hesitation. His robes were Potter black with silver trim. His signet ring caught the light with each gesture. Everything about him projected confidence, authority, belonging. Inside, his heart was racing. The Wisingamot is called to order, Dumbledore's voice rang through the chamber. We convene today to hear charges brought by Lord Harry James Potter, head of houses Potter, Black, Peverell, Slytherin, and Emrys, against Lord Lucius Abraxas Malfoy, head of House Malfoy. Murmurs rippled through the benches. The full list of Harry's titles still had that effect. Lord Potter, you may present your charges. Harry took a breath. This was it. Everything he'd prepared for. Members of the Wisingamot, he began, I stand before you today to present evidence of crimes against the noble houses of magical Britain. Crimes committed not in darkness, but in the light of legal technicalities. Not through violence, but through the corruption of institutions meant to protect us all. He gestured, and documents floated from his podium to distribute themselves among the members. Over the past decade, while I was raised in ignorance of my heritage, unauthorized individuals accessed vaults belonging to houses Potter, Black, and Slytherin. The total value of assets appropriated exceeds 6 million galleons. More murmurs. Even for the Wisingamot, that was a staggering sum. But the theft of gold, while significant, is not my primary concern. Harry's voice hardened. My concern is what that gold was used for. Bribery of ministry officials. Funding of political campaigns. Purchasing of votes in this very chamber. He let the words hang in the air. The gold of noble houses was used to corrupt the institutions of magical Britain. Under Section 47 of the Charter of 1612, this constitutes appropriation of noble house influence, an offence that carries penalties including forfeiture of assets, stripping of titles, and exile. From across the chamber, Lucius Malfoy's voice cut like a blade. A compelling narrative, Lord Potter. But narratives require evidence. He rose from his seat, every inch the aristocrat, his confidence apparently unshaken. "I assume you have some." "I do." What followed was hours of testimony, documentation, and argument. The Parkinson's records, delivered by a pale and sweating Lord Parkinson who couldn't meet Malfoy's eyes. The Crabbe's insurance documents, detailing communications that proved coordination. The Goyle's financial records, showing the flow of appropriated funds. And Harry's own presentation, calm, precise, methodical, laying out the pattern of theft and corruption with the clarity of someone who'd spent days preparing for exactly this moment. Malfoy's advocates fought every point. They challenged the validity of the documents, the reliability of the witnesses, the interpretation of ancient laws. They argued that the transactions were authorized under ministry emergency provisions, that the charter's penalties were obsolete and unenforceable, that an 11-year-old child couldn't possibly understand the complexities of wizarding finance. Harry answered each objection with evidence. When they questioned Parkinson's credibility, he produced goblin records that corroborated every detail. When they cited ministry provisions, he showed the specific dates and amounts that proved those provisions didn't apply. When they suggested he was a puppet of goblin interests, he spoke with such command of the material that even his critics had to acknowledge his preparation. The session stretched past noon, past evening, into the early hours of the next morning. Members shifted restlessly. Tempers flared. At one point, two lords nearly came to wands over an obscure procedural dispute. Through it all, Harry stood at his podium, patient and precise, waiting for the moment he knew would come. It came near the end, when Malfoy himself rose to make his final argument. "This chamber has heard much today about ancient laws and noble principles," Malfoy said, his voice smooth as silk. "But let us speak plainly. What we are really witnessing is the manipulation of a child by enemies of traditional wizarding values. Lord Potter, a boy of 11, has been convinced by goblin interests and political opportunists to attack one of Britain's most respected families." He turned to face Harry directly. "Whatever happened in those vaults, and I dispute every characterization offered today, it pales in comparison to the damage being done by this proceeding itself. We are setting a precedent that allows ancient laws to be weaponized against anyone who has made enemies of the right people." His eyes were cold, triumphant. He thought he was winning. "I call upon this body to reject these charges and censure Lord Potter for wasting our time with politically motivated accusations." Harry waited until the murmurs died down. Then, quietly, he spoke. "Lord Malfoy mentions ancient laws. He suggests they shouldn't apply to modern circumstances." Harry reached into his robes and produced a final document. "But I have one more piece of evidence to present. Something I've saved until now because I wanted the Wisingamot to understand the full context first." He held up the parchment. "This is a marriage contract. Signed in 1823 between houses Malfoy and Greengrass. Under its terms, the Malfoys owe the Greengrass family a substantial payment in the event of any legal finding against the Malfoy heir that involves charges of, let me quote directly, theft, corruption, or misappropriation of resources belonging to other noble houses." Silence. Harry let it stretch. "The contract specifies that the payment must come from Malfoy family assets, not personal funds, not business holdings, but the entailed family estate. The amount, adjusted for inflation over 2 centuries, is approximately 4 million galleons." Lucius Malfoy's face had gone pale. "I mention this," Harry continued, "because it demonstrates something important. The Malfoys have been concerned about exactly these charges for generations. This contract exists because they always knew, that their methods of acquiring wealth and influence might someday come to light." He turned to face the full chamber. "Lord Malfoy asks you to believe that ancient laws are being weaponized against him. But he prepared for exactly this situation 2 centuries ago. He knew the laws. He knew the penalties. He did it anyway, believing he would never face consequences." Harry's voice hardened. "The question before this body is simple, Do we allow the powerful to escape justice because they're clever enough to game the system? Or do we demonstrate that the laws of magical Britain apply to everyone, regardless of wealth or connections? He placed his hands on the podium. I've presented my evidence. I've answered every objection. The choice is yours. The vote took another hour, as members debated and argued and were lobbied by both sides. Harry waited with Grip Hook and 2 goblin guards, watching the chaos of wizarding democracy unfold. Daphne found him during a brief recess. The contract, she said quietly. I didn't tell you about that. No. Ragnarok found it in the Gringotts archives. Harry met her eyes. Your family is going to receive a very large payment if this vote goes my way. I know. Her expression was complicated. My father is conflicted. He didn't expect to benefit personally from any of this. Does it change things between us? Daphne was quiet for a moment. Then, surprisingly, she smiled. If anything, it makes things clearer. You didn't tell me about the contract because you wanted me to help you without knowing I had a personal stake. Her eyes met his. You trusted me to be here for the right reasons. Did I? You did. She reached out and touched his arm briefly. I would have helped anyway. But it's nice to know you believe that. Before Harry could respond, the bells rang calling the Wizengamot back to session. The vote was called. Dumbledore read each name, each response, his voice echoing through the chamber. Harry kept count in his head, watching the numbers climb on both sides. Against. Against. 4. 4. Against. 4. 4. By the time it reached the final votes, the tally stood at 19 for, 18 against. 3 members remained. Lady Marchbanks voted for. Lord Ogden voted for. And then Dumbledore himself, as Chief Warlock, was required to break the tie in his capacity as senior member. The old wizard looked at Harry for a long moment. Something passed between them, not understanding, exactly, but acknowledgement. Recognition of what this moment meant for both of them. For, Dumbledore said quietly. The chamber erupted. The aftermath was chaos. Lucius Malfoy was taken into custody for processing of the sentence, forfeiture of assets gained through appropriation, stripping of his Wizengamot seat, and formal censure that would follow him for the rest of his life. Not exile, which required a supermajority Harry hadn't achieved, but enough to cripple his political power for years. The Greengrass payment would be finalized within 30 days. Lord Greengrass had already sent word that he wished to meet with Harry at his earliest convenience. And the Daily Prophet, which had obtained exclusive access to the proceedings, was already preparing a morning edition with the headline, Boy Who Lived Brings Down Malfoy Empire. Harry stepped out of the Wizengamot chamber into the quiet of the ministry's lower corridors. His hands were shaking, not from fear anymore, but from exhaustion and the slow release of tension he'd been holding for days. He'd won. Against one of the most powerful families in Britain, against political machines that had operated for decades, against everyone who'd assumed a child couldn't fight back, he'd won. But even as the reality of victory settled over him, he knew it wasn't over. Malfoy had allies. The Conclave, whatever they were, had made their displeasure known. And Dumbledore's vote, while helpful, came with implications Harry didn't fully understand. He was just contemplating next steps when a voice spoke from the shadows. Impressive, Lord Potter. Truly impressive. Harry's hand moved toward his wand, but the figure that emerged wasn't threatening, at least, not obviously. It was a witch, middle-aged, with severe features and graying hair pulled back in a tight bun. She wore ministry robes, but something about her bearing suggested authority that went beyond bureaucratic rank. I don't believe we've met, Harry said carefully. We haven't. My name is Dolores Umbridge. Senior Undersecretary to the Minister. Her smile was wide and didn't reach her eyes. I've been watching your performance with great interest. Should I be flattered? You should be careful. The smile widened. You've made powerful enemies today, Lord Potter. Enemies who have long memories and considerable resources. It would be unfortunate if your promising career were to end prematurely. Harry studied her. There was something wrong about this woman, something that set his instincts on edge in a way that even Malfoy hadn't managed. Is that a threat, Madam Umbridge? Merely an observation. The magical world can be dangerous for those who don't know their place. She turned as if to leave, then paused. One more thing. The minister asked me to convey his congratulations on your victory. He looks forward to meeting you when the opportunity arises. She walked away, her footsteps echoing in the empty corridor. Harry watched her go, something cold settling in his stomach. The victory was real. The danger was far from over. And somewhere in the Ministry of Magic, forces were already moving that would make Lucius Malfoy look like a minor inconvenience. He found Daphne waiting for him outside the ministry entrance, wrapped in a cloak against the pre-dawn chill. "It's done," she said. "Not a question. It's done." Harry fell into step beside her. "Your family's about to become considerably wealthier. My father's already planning how to invest it. He's been nervous about our financial position for years. This changes everything. Happy to help." They walked in silence for a while, the streets of magical London empty around them. The sun was just beginning to lighten the eastern sky. "What happens now?" Daphne asked finally. "Hogwarts in 2 weeks. The sorting. Classes." Harry shrugged. "The normal things, I suppose." "Nothing about you is normal, Harry Potter." "No." He thought about Umbridge's smile, about the Conclave's warning, about everything that still waited in the shadows. "I suppose it isn't. Are you scared?" The question was surprisingly direct. Harry considered it seriously. "I was," he admitted. "When I first learned what I'd inherited, when I realized how many people had been working against me. But somewhere along the way, fear stopped being useful." "What replaced it?" "Clarity." He looked at her. "I know what I'm fighting for now. I know who my enemies are. The rest is just details." Daphne was quiet for a moment. Then she did something unexpected, she reached out and took his hand. "Then I'll help you with the details," she said. "That's what partners do." Harry looked at their joined hands, at this girl who'd appeared in his life barely a week ago and had already become essential to his plans. "Partners," he agreed. The sun rose over London, painting the sky in shades of gold and red. Somewhere behind them, the machinery of magical politics was already churning, preparing new challenges and new threats. But for now, in this moment, Harry Potter and Daphne Greengrass walked through the dawn together, and the future felt like something they might actually be able to shape. The owl arrived 3 days later, as Harry was preparing for his final meeting with Ragnarok before Hogwarts. It was a different bird this time, smaller, darker, with eyes that gleamed with unsettling intelligence. It carried a single envelope sealed with black wax, stamped with a symbol Harry recognized from his study of the Peveril Vault. 3 shapes arranged in a triangle. A line, a circle, a triangle within. The Deathly Hallows. Harry broke the seal with steady hands, though his heart was racing. "Lord Potter, you have moved pieces on a board you do not fully understand. This is not a criticism, all players must learn the game somewhere. The Conclave of Shadows observes your progress with interest. Your actions against House Malfoy were skillfully executed, and we acknowledge your right to defend your heritage. But skill is not wisdom. Courage is not caution. And victory in small matters does not guarantee survival in larger ones. We offer you a choice: join us, and learn truths that have been hidden for centuries. Oppose us, and discover why so many who tried before have been forgotten. The Arbiter watches. The Arbiter waits. The Arbiter remembers what your ancestors chose, and wonders if you will choose differently. A response is expected before the autumn equinox. There was no signature. Only the Hallows symbol, repeated at the bottom of the page. Harry read the letter twice, then burned it with a whispered spell. The smoke curled toward the ceiling, carrying threats and promises into nothing. "Whoever you are," Harry said quietly to the empty room, "I don't respond to ultimatums." He gathered his documents and headed for Gringotts. There was still work to be done. And somewhere, in the shadows of magical Britain, the Arbiter watched, and began to plan. Chapter 2 and Chapter 3, Sorting Shadows. Platform 9 3/4 was chaos given form. Steam billowed from the scarlet locomotive that dominated the station, obscuring clusters of families saying goodbye, children chasing escaped pets, and trunks being loaded with the help of harried house elves. The noise was overwhelming: shouts, laughter, the screech of owls, the occasional bang of accidental magic from nervous first years. Harry observed it all from beneath the cloak of invisibility, taking in details that most would miss. The way certain families clustered together, forming obvious political blocks even on a train platform. The subtle acknowledgements between parents who recognized each other from Wisengamot sessions. The children who'd clearly been coached on who to approach and who to avoid. Even here, in what should have been a moment of pure excitement, the game never stopped. He'd arrived early, before the main crush, and found a position near the barrier that let him watch without being watched. The cloak was perfect for this, not just invisibility, but complete concealment of sound and magical signature. He could have walked through the ministry itself without triggering a single ward. Now he used it to learn. The Malfoys arrived at 10:30, which surprised him. He'd expected Lucius to be consumed with legal proceedings, but the man walked onto the platform with his wife and son as if nothing had happened. His robes were immaculate, his bearing imperious, his expression betraying nothing of the disaster that had befallen him 2 weeks ago. Draco looked different. The arrogant sneer Harry had glimpsed during their brief encounter at the solicitor's office was gone, replaced by something more guarded. He stuck close to his parents, eyes scanning the crowd with wariness that seemed new. Lucius leaned down to speak in his son's ear. Harry couldn't hear the words, but he could read the body language: instruction, warning, expectation. Whatever Draco had been told about his family's situation, it had clearly affected him. Good. A destabilized enemy was easier to manage than a confident one. The Greengrasses arrived next: Lord Cyrus, a sharp-featured man with Daphne's calculating eyes, and his younger daughter Astoria, who looked about 9 and seemed utterly delighted by everything around her. Daphne herself was composed, elegant in traveling robes of deep blue, her expression revealing nothing. She didn't look for Harry. They'd agreed on that. Public association would invite speculation, and speculation would invite interference. But as she walked past his position, her hand brushed her collar in a specific pattern, a signal they'd established. All clear. Proceed as planned. Harry smiled beneath the cloak. Partners indeed. More families arrived as 11 o'clock approached. He catalogued faces, names, connections, the Knotts, quiet and withdrawn, the Parkinsons, trying desperately to project normalcy, the Longbottoms, accompanying a round-faced boy who clutched a toad like a lifeline. That last one caught his attention. Neville Longbottom, the other boy the prophecy could have referred to, according to what Harry had pieced together from his parents' journals. His parents were the Alice and Frank Longbottom who'd been tortured into insanity by Death Eaters, and he'd been raised by his formidable grandmother Augusta. There but for the grace of a Dark Lord's choice, Harry thought. At 10 minutes to 11, he slipped through the crowd and boarded the train, finding an empty compartment near the back. He removed the cloak, stowed his trunk, and settled in to wait. The game was about to begin. The first visitor arrived before the train even moved. The compartment door slid open to reveal a tall, red-haired boy with freckles and a smudge of dirt on his nose. He looked around nervously before his eyes found Harry. "Anyone sitting here?" He gestured at the empty seats. "Everywhere else is full." That was a lie. Harry had watched the boarding. There were plenty of available compartments. But he recognized the name on the trunk the boy was struggling to carry. R. Weasley. The Weasleys were a known quantity. Poor but proud, staunchly allied with Dumbledore's faction, with a reputation for producing children faster than they could afford them. This would be Ron, the youngest son, starting Hogwarts the same year as Harry. Coincidence? Or placement? Go ahead, Harry said, keeping his tone neutral. Ron dragged his trunk inside, shoving it under the seat with more force than necessary. He flopped down across from Harry and let out a theatrical sigh. Thanks. I'm Ron, by the way. Ron Weasley. Harry Potter. Ron's eyes went wide. Then, predictably, they flicked to Harry's forehead. Blimey. I mean, you're really, is that the scar? Yes. Harry kept his expression pleasant. Most people are polite enough not to stare. Right. Right, sorry. Ron had the grace to look embarrassed. It's just, you're famous, you know. Everyone's been talking about you. The thing with the Malfoys, and the Wisengamot, and, he stopped, suddenly uncertain. Is it true you've got 5 noble houses? It's true. Wicked. Ron leaned forward, his earlier nervousness replaced by eager curiosity. My dad works at the Ministry, in the Misuse of Muggle Artifacts office. He was there when the vote happened. Said it was the most exciting thing he'd ever seen. I'm glad someone enjoyed it. The dry tone went over Ron's head. So what's it like? Being, you know, rich and powerful and all that? Harry considered his response carefully. This boy was clearly angling for something, friendship, probably, or at least association. The question was whether that impulse came from genuine interest or external direction. Complicated, he said finally. Lots of people wanting things from you. Hard to know who to trust. Yeah, I bet. Ron nodded sagely. My mum always says, the compartment door slid open again. There you are. Daphne's voice was cool, perfectly pitched to suggest she'd been searching for him. I've been looking everywhere. Ron turned, and his expression shifted immediately, surprise giving way to something more guarded. The Weasleys and Greengrasses had no direct conflict, but they occupied opposite ends of the social spectrum. Ancient pureblood neutrality meeting scrappy light-aligned poverty. Greengrass, Ron said flatly. Weasley. Daphne settled into the seat beside Harry, arranging her robes with precise movements. I didn't realize you'd made friends already, Harry. The use of his first name was deliberate, establishing intimacy, claiming territory. Ron's ears went red. We just met, Harry said mildly. Ron was telling me about his father's work at the Ministry. How fascinating. Daphne's tone suggested the opposite. I'm sure regulating Muggle artifacts is very important. Ron's jaw tightened. It keeps wizards safe from Muggle things that might hurt them. Of course it does. Daphne smiled. It wasn't a kind smile. Harry watched the exchange with interest. There were layers here, class tension, political alignment, personal temperament. Ron Weasley wasn't sophisticated enough to hide his reactions, which made him easy to read. Daphne was needling him deliberately, establishing a dynamic that pushed him toward the defensive. The question was whether Harry wanted to encourage that dynamic or redirect it. He decided on redirection. Daphne, perhaps we could discuss the herbology reading list. Ron, what house do you expect to be sorted into? The shift caught both of them off guard. Ron blinked, then recovered. Gryffindor, I hope. All my brothers were in Gryffindor. He puffed up slightly. The Weasleys have been Gryffindors for generations. And you, Daphne? Slytherin, almost certainly. She didn't sound bothered by this. It's traditional for my family. What about you, Harry? Ron leaned forward eagerly. Everyone says you'll be in Gryffindor, like your parents. But some people think. He trailed off, apparently remembering who else was in the compartment. Some people think I'll be in Slytherin, Harry finished. Given the whole air of Slytherin thing. Ron's face scrunched in obvious discomfort. Well, yeah. But that's not, I mean, you're the boy who lived. You defeated you-know-who. You have to be a Gryffindor. Do I? The question hung in the air. Ron didn't seem to know how to answer it. The Sorting Hat chooses based on individual qualities, Daphne said smoothly. Not family history or public expectation. Harry could end up anywhere. She paused. Though I imagine some people would be very disappointed if he didn't follow the script they've written for him. Ron's ears went red again. What's that supposed to mean? It means, Harry cut in before Daphne could escalate, that I'm not planning to be anyone's puppet. Whatever house I end up in, it'll be my choice. Not Dumbledore's, not the Prophet's, not anyone else's. Silence fell over the compartment. Ron was staring at Harry with an expression that mixed confusion with something like hurt. Daphne's eyes held a flicker of approval that she quickly suppressed. The compartment door slid open a third time. Has anyone seen a toad? A boy named Neville's lost one. The girl in the doorway was about their age, with bushy brown hair and front teeth that were slightly too large. Her robes were new but not expensive, and she held herself with the aggressive confidence of someone who'd never learned to hide her intelligence. We haven't seen any toads, Harry said. But you're welcome to check under the seats if you'd like. She bustled in without hesitation, dropping to her knees to peer beneath the benches. Neville's been frantic. He's convinced Trevor's gotten off the train entirely. Trevor. The toad. She emerged from her search, brushing off her knees. I'm Hermione Granger, by the way. I've read all about you, of course. You're in modern magical history and the rise and fall of the dark arts and great wizarding events of the 20th century. Pleasure to meet you, Harry said, and found that he meant it. There was something refreshing about Hermione Granger. She wasn't playing games, wasn't angling for position, wasn't trying to figure out how to use him. She was just intensely, almost aggressively, interested in everything. You're really him, then. She sat down without being invited, apparently having forgotten about the toad. Harry Potter. I've read everything I could find, but the books don't agree on basic facts. Some say you were raised by Muggles, but others mention a magical upbringing. Muggles, Harry confirmed. My aunt and uncle. That must have been strange. Finding out about magic, I mean. I'm Muggle-born myself, got my letter last summer, and it was the most extraordinary experience. I've learned all the first-year spells already and read through all our textbooks. Do you think that will be enough? I'm terribly worried I'll be behind everyone else. Ron made a sound that might have been a snort. Daphne's expression remained carefully neutral. I'm sure you'll be fine, Harry said. From what I understand, most students don't prepare that thoroughly. But they've grown up with magic. They must know so much more, actually, Daphne said, her tone surprisingly not hostile. Most pure-blood children learn very little practical magic before Hogwarts. Wand magic is restricted for minors, and theoretical knowledge only goes so far without application. Hermione turned to her with obvious interest. Really? That's not mentioned in any of the books I've read. The books are written from a particular perspective. Daphne shrugged. You'll find that's true of most information in our world. Something passed between the two girls, recognition, maybe, of intelligence meeting intelligence. I'm Daphne Greengrass, Daphne said. And you've already met Harry. The redhead is Ron Weasley. Weasley? Hermione's eyes lit up. I've read about your family too. Arthur Weasley's papers on Muggle artifacts are fascinating, the way he approaches the interaction between magical and non-magical engineering. Ron looked like he didn't know whether to be pleased or horrified that someone had actually read his father's work. The toad was forgotten. The four of them spent the next hour in conversation that ranged from spell theory to house politics to the practical challenges of adjusting to magical society. Hermione asked questions with machine gun intensity. Ron offered occasional insights about growing up in the magical world. Daphne provided political context that the books didn't cover. And Harry watched, listened, and learned. The train had been moving for 2 hours when Draco Malfoy finally made his appearance. He came with an entourage, 2 large boys who flanked him like bodyguards, and a pug-faced girl who looked like she'd rather be anywhere else. The compartment door slid open without a knock, and Malfoy stepped inside like he owned the place. "So it's true," he said, his eyes finding Harry. "Harry Potter is on the train." Harry didn't stand. "Draco Malfoy. I was wondering when you'd come by." The use of his first name without permission made Malfoy's eye twitch. "I see you've been keeping interesting company." His gaze swept across the compartment's occupants. "A Weasley, a Greengrass, and..." He looked at Hermione. "I don't recognize you." "Hermione Granger," she said, her chin lifting. "And you are someone you should probably learn about before speaking." Malfoy's tone dripped condescension. "But then, I wouldn't expect a mudblood to understand proper social hierarchy." The temperature in the compartment dropped. "Apologize," Harry said quietly. Malfoy turned back to him, eyebrows raised. "Excuse me?" "You heard me." Harry's voice hadn't changed, still calm, still controlled, but something in it made the 2 large boys shift nervously. "You just insulted a guest in my presence. That demands an apology." "Potter, perhaps you don't understand, I understand perfectly." Harry stood, and though he was shorter than Malfoy, something about his bearing made that irrelevant. "Your father spent a decade stealing from my family. He's currently facing financial ruin and social exile. And you thought the appropriate move was to walk into my compartment and insult my companions?" Malfoy's face had gone pale. Behind him, his entourage was looking increasingly uncomfortable. "Either you apologize," Harry continued, "or you leave. And if you ever use that word in my presence again, I'll see to it that your family's troubles multiply significantly." Silence stretched. The whole compartment was watching, Ron with barely concealed delight, Hermione with wide-eyed surprise, Daphne with carefully hidden approval. Draco Malfoy looked at Harry Potter, and whatever he saw there made him recalculate. "I apologize," he said stiffly. "Miss Granger. My comment was inappropriate." "Thank you," Hermione said, her voice slightly strangled. "We should go." Malfoy's dignity was barely intact. "I merely wanted to introduce myself, Potter. It seems that won't be necessary." He left. His entourage followed. The door slid shut behind them. "Bloody hell," Ron breathed. "You just made Draco Malfoy apologize. To a Muggle-born. In front of his cronies. I made him make a choice." Harry sat back down. He could have refused. It would have been interesting to see what happened then. "What would have happened?" Hermione asked. Her voice was smaller than before, the aggressive confidence shaken by the slur. "Nothing good for him." Harry met her eyes. "For what it's worth, that word has no power over you unless you give it power. It's used by small people to make themselves feel big. But what does it even mean? Dirty blood." Daphne's voice was flat. "It's what some purebloods call Muggleborns. An implication that non-magical ancestry makes someone lesser. That's ridiculous. Blood doesn't determine magical ability, I've read the studies, you're preaching to the choir." Daphne smiled slightly. "But prejudice rarely cares about evidence." Hermione was quiet for a moment, processing. Then her chin lifted again. "Well," she said. "I suppose I'll just have to prove them wrong." "That's the spirit," Harry said. The train rolled on toward Scotland, carrying its cargo of children toward a castle where the games would continue, but where, perhaps, something like genuine connection might also be possible. Hogwarts emerged from the darkness like a dream made solid. Harry had seen images in his books, read descriptions in histories, but nothing had prepared him for the reality. The castle rose from its rocky prominence like something grown rather than built, towers and turrets reaching toward a star-filled sky. Lights blazed from 1,000 windows. The lake before it reflected everything, doubling the impossibility. First years. First years over here. Hagrid's voice boomed across the platform. Harry spotted the giant man holding a lantern, his beard and wild hair making him look like something from mythology. Their eyes met across the crowd. Hagrid's expression was complicated, affection mixed with uncertainty. He'd been avoiding Harry since the day at Gringotts, probably on Dumbledore's instructions. But the greeting he offered was warm enough. "Harry. Good to see ya. Into the boats, everyone." The boats were enchanted to guide themselves across the black water, for students to each. Harry found himself sharing with Daphne, Hermione, and, by apparent accident, Neville Longbottom, who'd finally located his toad and was clutching it with desperate determination. "I'm Neville," the round-faced boy said nervously. "Longbottom. Sorry about earlier, with Trevor, I mean. Hermione said you helped look. Glad he turned up." Harry studied Neville with new interest. This was the other child of prophecy, the one Voldemort hadn't chosen. What might have been different if the Dark Lord had decided this boy was the greater threat? "Gran says I need to stop losing things," Neville continued, apparently taking Harry's silence as invitation to talk. "She says the Longbottoms have always been organized, and I'm letting down the family name. That sounds stressful." "It is a bit." Neville's laugh was self-deprecating. "But Gran means well. She just wants me to live up to my parents' legacy. They were Aurors, you know. Before." He trailed off, eyes dropping to Trevor. "I know," Harry said quietly. "I'm sorry." "Thanks." Neville's voice was small. "Most people don't really talk about it. They just look at me with that expression, like they're waiting to see if I'll turn out to be a disappointment." Harry understood that feeling all too well. "For what it's worth," he said, "I don't think legacies are something you inherit. They're something you build." Neville looked at him with surprise that faded into something like hope. That's a good way to think about it." "Thanks, Harry." The boats rounded a curve, and Hogwarts filled their vision entirely. Somewhere ahead, a door was opening, leading to a hall where centuries of students had been sorted into houses that would shape their lives. Harry touched the cloak in his pocket, feeling its ancient power pulse against his fingers. Whatever came next, he was ready. Professor McGonagall was exactly as Harry's research had described, severe, Scottish, and absolutely no nonsense. She collected the first years in an antechamber off the Great Hall and delivered a speech about houses, points, and the expectations of Hogwarts students that was clearly well rehearsed. "The sorting ceremony will begin momentarily," she concluded. "I suggest you all smarten yourselves up." She left. The first years immediately began to buzz with nervous conversation. "How exactly do they sort us?" Hermione was asking anyone who would listen. "The books don't say." "Do we have to perform magic?" "Because I've practiced the first year spells, but I'm not sure." "It's a hat," Ron said. "My brothers told me. You just put it on and it looks inside your head." "A hat that performs legilimency?" Hermione's eyes went wide. "That's fascinating. I wonder what enchantments." "It doesn't look inside your head exactly," Daphne cut in. "It assesses your character, your values, your potential. Then it places you where it thinks you'll thrive." "What if it places you wrong?" Neville's voice was small and worried. "What if it thinks you belong somewhere you don't? Then you argue with it." Harry's voice was calm. "The hat considers your preferences. If you really don't want to be somewhere, it usually listens." Everyone turned to look at him. "How do you know that?" Ron asked. Research. Harry shrugged. The sorting hat was created by the founders. It's not infallible, and it's not tyrannical. It makes recommendations based on its assessment, but the final choice often comes down to the student. Before anyone could respond, the doors to the great hall swung open. McGonagall led them inside, and every thought of sorting mechanics fled in the face of the hall itself. It was vast, larger than it had any right to be, given the castle's external dimensions. For long tables stretched toward a raised platform where the staff sat, each table crowded with students in colored ties. Thousands of candles floated overhead, and above them, the ceiling showed a night sky so perfect Harry had to remind himself it was enchanted. On a stool at the front of the hall sat a battered, patched, dirty old hat. Then the hat moved. A rip near the brim opened like a mouth, and it began to sing. Harry listened to the song, a description of each house and its values, delivered in surprisingly good verse, but his attention was on the staff table. Dumbledore sat at the center, resplendent in robes of midnight blue, watching the procession of first-years with twinkling eyes. To his right sat a severe-looking witch who had to be Professor Sprout, head of Hufflepuff. To his left, a tiny wizard who was probably Flitwick. And further along the table, in robes of pure black, sat a man with lank dark hair and a hooked nose who was staring directly at Harry with an expression of pure loathing. Severus Snape. Potions Master. Former Death Eater. And, according to Harry's research, someone who'd known his parents at Hogwarts. The hatred in those dark eyes was personal. Harry filed it away and returned his attention to the sorting. "When I call your name," McGonagall announced, "you will sit on the stool and put on the hat." Abbott, Hannah. A girl with blonde pigtails stumbled forward. The hat was placed on her head and barely touched her hair before shouting, "Hufflepuff." The yellow-tied table burst into applause. The sorting continued. Bones, Susan, went to Hufflepuff. Boot, Terry, to Ravenclaw. Brown, Lavender, to Gryffindor. Harry watched each sorting with analytical interest, noting which students went where and how the hat's decisions aligned with what he knew of their families. The patterns were imperfect but discernible. Blood purists to Slytherin. Dumbledore loyalists to Gryffindor. Academics to Ravenclaw. The rest to Hufflepuff. Granger, Hermione. Hermione rushed forward and jammed the hat on her head with barely concealed excitement. There was a pause, longer than some of the others, before the hat announced, "Ravenclaw." Hermione beamed as she headed for the blue-tied table. Harry caught her eye and nodded slightly. A good fit. Greengrass, Daphne. Daphne walked forward with perfect poise, sat on the stool, and placed the hat on her head as if she were crowning herself. The hat took barely 3 seconds. Slytherin. No surprise there. Daphne glided to the green and silver table, taking a seat with the composed dignity of someone returning to familiar territory. Longbottom, Neville. Neville tripped on his way to the stool. The hat sat on his head for a long time, nearly 2 minutes, before finally calling, "Gryffindor," in what sounded almost like an exasperated tone. Malfoy, Draco. The hat barely touched Draco's head before screaming, "Slytherin," with what Harry thought might be relief. Draco smirked and sauntered to his new house's table. More names. More sortings. The crowd of first-years dwindled. Potter, Harry. The whispers started immediately. Potter, did she say? The Harry Potter. I heard he has 5 noble houses. Harry walked to the stool with measured steps, refusing to hurry despite the weight of hundreds of staring eyes. He sat, and McGonagall lowered the hat onto his head. Immediately, the hall vanished. Well, well, well. The voice was inside his head, dry and ancient and faintly amused. What have we here? Harry Potter, no, that's not quite right, is it? Lord Potter, Black, Peverell, Slytherin, Emrys. My. You're the most interesting mind I've seen in centuries. Thank you, Harry thought back. I think. Such defenses. The hat sounded impressed. Natural occlumency barriers, and you haven't even been trained. Your heritage is strong, young lord. Very strong indeed. Can we get to the sorting? Eager, are we? Yes, I can see that. No patience for deliberation when there are things to be done. The hat seemed to be rifling through his memories, examining his thoughts. Courage in abundance, you've faced things that would break most adults. Loyalty too, though you're careful who receives it. Intelligence is obvious, you do brilliantly in Ravenclaw. And ambition. The hat paused. You know exactly what you want, don't you? Power, but not for its own sake. Influence, but directed toward purpose. You want to reshape the world, and you've already begun. Is that Slytherin? It could be. Salazar would have welcomed you, you're his heir, after all, and not just by conquest. You have his mind, his drive, his willingness to do whatever necessary to achieve your goals. Another pause. But there's something else. Something that doesn't quite fit. Which is? You care about people. The hat sounded almost puzzled. Not just as tools or allies, but as individuals with their own worth. The girl on the train, the Muggle-born, you defended her not because it was strategic but because it was right. The Longbottom boy, you offered him comfort without expecting anything in return. Is that so unusual? For someone with your other qualities? Yes. The hat's voice shifted, becoming more serious. Slytherin would sharpen your cunning but might dull your compassion. Gryffindor would feed your courage but might stunt your ambition. Ravenclaw would hone your intellect but might isolate you from the connections you'll need. Then what do you suggest? The hat was silent for a long moment. I suggest, it said finally, that you choose. You have the qualities for all four houses, and you have the strength of will to override my recommendation. So tell me, Harry Potter, where do you want to go? Harry thought about it. He thought about Dumbledore's expectations. The headmaster was probably certain Harry would end up in Gryffindor, had probably planned for it, was probably already considering how to guide a Gryffindor Harry toward the path he'd designed. He thought about the political implications. A Slytherin Harry would shock everyone, would throw every faction's calculations into chaos, would make it impossible for anyone to assume they knew what he would do. He thought about the practical considerations. Slytherin was where his enemies were. Malfoy, Parkinson, not. The children of families he'd already clashed with, would clash with again. But he also thought about something else. He thought about Daphne, who was already at the Slytherin table, who'd risked her family's neutrality to help him, who was watching the Sorting Hat with carefully hidden anxiety. He thought about Hermione, brilliant and defensive and desperate to prove herself, who was watching from Ravenclaw with undisguised curiosity. He thought about Ron, who'd been placed in Gryffindor and was probably hoping Harry would join him there, who wanted a famous friend for reasons Harry wasn't sure were entirely genuine. He thought about Neville, who'd barely made it into Gryffindor and who needed friends more than he needed a hero to worship. And he thought about himself. About what he actually wanted, beyond strategy and politics and the endless game. I want, he thought carefully, to be somewhere I can actually grow. Not just sharpen specific qualities, but become more than I currently am. The hat made a sound that might have been a laugh. A wise answer. Perhaps the wisest I've heard in centuries. It paused. Very well, Harry Potter. If growth is what you seek, then I know exactly where to put you. Slytherin. The word rang through the hall, and everything changed. The silence lasted 3 full seconds. Then the Slytherin table erupted into applause, not the polite welcome they'd given other sortings, but genuine, raucous celebration. Across the hall, the other houses stared in stunned disbelief. At the staff table, Dumbledore's twinkling eyes had gone still, and Snape looked like he'd swallowed something extremely unpleasant. Harry removed the hat and handed it to McGonagall, whose expression had gone carefully blank. Thank you, Professor. He walked to the Slytherin table without hurrying, choosing a seat next to Daphne with deliberate precision. Around him, his new housemates were still buzzing with excitement. Potters in Slytherin. The boy who lived, in our house. Did you see Dumbledore's face? Daphne leaned close, her voice barely audible over the noise. That was unexpected. Was it? Most people thought you'd go Gryffindor. I assumed you'd at least want to avoid the obvious complications of being in Slytherin. Harry glanced down the table at Draco Malfoy, who was staring at him with an expression of utter confusion. The obvious complications, he said quietly, are why I'm here. Before Daphne could respond, the sorting resumed. Harry watched the remaining